Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1574 of the War News stream. And tonight we have very big news that Ukraine's been attacking around the Kremlin, about 15 kilometers from the Kremlin itself, and also huge explosions in Moscow and a wide series of attacks this morning. Also, get this, Iran has just restarted ship attacks near Hormuz Strait despite the U.S. agreement, and also a Russian warship fired warning shots at a boat near the English coast. And we have a lot of news today, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news from around the world. Actually, the past 48 hours of the news from around the world, as we have had significant developments over the course of the day, particularly from the war in Ukraine, Western Europe, and the Middle East over the past 48 hours. As we have been able to see that Ukrainian armed forces have conducted significant drone campaigns against the Russian Federation, with drones exploding around the inner perimeter of the city of Moscow, including major hits just about 12 miles away from the Kremlin on one of the 10 largest oil refineries within the entirety of the Russian Federation, directly within the central area of the southern side of the city of Moscow. This strike has been able to knock out 40% of the city of Moscow's fuel capabilities, and has not only done that, but has knocked out about 300,000 barrels of refined fuel products a day in gross availability for the Russian supply chains as a whole. We've also seen that as of today, Tatneft and other major fuel distributors within the Russian Federation are now announcing nationwide fuel rationings and regimes. We have seen that that is resulting from these strikes that have continued to see that Russian fuel supplies are now beginning to absolutely collapse. We've also been able to see that endless fuel lines are now beginning to form on the M11 highway, or otherwise known as the St. Petersburg-Moscow highway, and Ukrainian forces have also conducted other major significant attacks on Russian oil depots within Krasnodar Krai, and some major explosions being reported within Yalta, although we're not entirely sure at the moment as to what was hit in Yalta and the damage that was caused. In the midst of this, the Ukrainian armed forces have been inflicting significant casualties onto Russian logistics forces around Donetsk City, Mariupol, and Melitopol, with a high-end electronic warfare system of the Russian armed forces being destroyed by the Luftwaffe unit today in the city of Melitopol. Additionally, we've also been able to report that on the front lines themselves, Ukrainian armed forces are still continuing to keep the upper hand and are still destroying and fighting Russian forces in large numbers throughout the active battlefield areas. We've also seen that the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Fedorov, has stated that Ukrainian ballistic missiles are about to be entering a new age incredibly soon, and new unveiled weapons will start to make Ukraine more of a regional power than anything before, and will certainly elevate Ukraine's strategic presence in the region by a significant and permanent margin. We've also seen that unfortunately a MiG-29 or an Su-25 crashed today near the city of Khmelnytsky, although we're not incredibly sure what the crash or why the crash happened, or why the crash was largely happening around the area of Khmelnytsky. We've also been able to additionally hear that the Russian Federation fired on a British sailing vessel today, firing warning shots incredibly close to the vessel's location. It turns out that these were conducted by the frigate the Admiral Grigorovich and were fired at a British sailing vessel that was operated by an old married couple of pensioners that were operating the sailboat within the international waters of the English Channel. We've also been able to get some additional information as well coming on out of the Eastern Pacific, as we did get to hear that Southcom conducted another strike today on an alleged narco boat within that area. We've also seen that a Russian Tu-22M3 crashed in what we can describe as a glorious fashion around the area of the city of Irkutsk in the Irkutsk Oblast. At the moment, it's completely unknown as to why this Tu-22M3 crashed, but it appears to have entered a fatal nosedive or possibly a tailspin, which led it into a crash in the forests surrounding the city. Additionally, we've also been able to get further details out of the Middle East, as we have been able to hear more terms pertaining to the United States peace deal, if we want to call it that, with the Islamic Republic of Iran and other developments that have occurred within the region. We've also seen that Iran has continued to fire on commercial ships, as reports have come out of explosions and what appears to be some sort of intermittent fire coming from Qasem Island towards civilian ships within the Strait of Hormuz, and we've also been able to hear that ISIS conducted an attack on an Iraqi oil tanker or an oil truck that was heading towards the area of Manbij, northern Syria, and ISIS has directly claimed responsibility for this attack, once again showing that ISIS is slowly rising in its prominence and its capabilities within the near regions of Iraq and Syria. We've also been able to hear that Tehran has stated to the Israelis that if they do not withdraw from southern Lebanon and stop their attacks against Hezbollah forces, that they will respond with major force against the state of Israel, and at the moment it appears that the Israelis will be entirely alone if the Iranians resume attacks against the state of Israel. We have been able to see a humongous amount of information today, and we're going to be making sure to get through this, starting with our largest stories first and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. And we have quite a lot to talk about, to say the least. Moving us on into our largest and most important pieces of news, we are going to be moving directly on into the Moscow city area, as Moscow has come under a significant drone and missile attack. Although we weren't able to see a large number of missiles, there was a report by some Russian air defense bloggers that there were apparently Ukrainian missiles of some sort entering the area, and we're believing that they may have mistaken those for jet-powered drones, which in some cases sound a lot like a cruise missile, but a lot fainter and a lot smaller in scale. We did get to see some videos, however, of the drones entering the Moscow area, starting off with our first clips of what appears to be Ukrainian reverse-engineered Shahed drones entering the area of the city, in this clip right here. Here it comes.
Also, since when has Ukraine had a Shahed variant? Because I'm not aware of them ever having one.
That's actually a pretty good question. I didn't really know that they had one either. And seeing this one today, this is actually kind of a shock, a little bit of a new sort of a thing. Apparently they have some version of it, although it does look very different when we look at it up close. The nose cone section is not as long as it is on the normal Shaheds, and it also appears that the wing roots, the wing structures themselves, are a decent bit wider but stubbier in length than that of a Shahed, but it shares a lot of similarities with the Shahed design in general. It looks to be a reverse engineered version of it.
Yeah, it looks like it. Or maybe, could it be possible that maybe the Lucas drone was given to Ukraine? Maybe that's part of it.
Maybe, but let me go look at the Lucas drone really quick, because I think it is pretty much, here's the thing about Lucas drones is that, let me see if I can get you all to the second clip here showing this drone. This one doesn't really show it that well, but if we look at it here, right at the end of the clip, you can see that the front of the nose section is actually kind of stubby. It's almost like the wings extend almost all the way up to the front of the nose cone, and there's just a little bit of it that protrudes forward, and the wings are also a good bit wider as well. And the Lucas drone appears to be a complete reverse engineered version of the Iranian Shahed, and notice how the wings are a little bit stubbier, like in terms of their overall width, and also that the nose cone appears to be a little bit longer than the one that we saw on this drone. So while it looks close, I think it is some sort of a Ukrainian-made version of the drone.
Could be. If that's the case, I understand why they did it, because it seems like everybody in every single country has a Shahed variant at this point, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Man, everybody and their dog has like one of these at this point. I think that new guy, that warlord down in Uganda, even has a couple of these, talking about getting the finest Turkish women in $1 million from Turkey for some reason. But we also got to see a clip here of the drone flying on over at a high speed over the outskirts of Moscow City. There it goes right there, actually moving at a very fast speed. Faster than most normal drones. Moving us on from that clip, we then saw that it was followed up by more conventional Firepoint drones like the FP1 and the FP2, which were making their way and into the refinery in this morning. We could see this one, though, seemed to have missed the mark by a little. But here's the incoming FP1 or FP2 drone. And we see that they hardly have it in frame, and there it is right there. And there it goes into the construction yard.
Oh. Holy cow. One thing's for sure, that thing's definitely not stealthy. That thing's loud as hell.
No, it's not stealthy at all. That thing is the loudest it can get.
Oh my God.
Nevertheless, it does appear that while that one missed, many other drones were able to make their way to their marks, and most importantly, into an area that we can only describe as detrimental for the Russian Federation. Let me bring y'all into the Moscow City area and actually show y'all where these attacks happened precisely. They happened right here in the southern part of the city, and I'm trying to make sure that I can show it. Here it is, right here. This is the oil refinery that we are looking for. This one, I believe, is called the Kaputnya Refinery, and it's an incredibly important one for the city of Moscow and the Russian Federation. The Kaputnya Refinery was originally built and is operated to be able to provide a significant amount of the refined fuel products specifically for the capital city of Moscow. This one refinery provides 40% of the city of Moscow's daily fuel and diesel requirements on the day-to-day. From the rail yards that exist here in the central area of the refinery, they're able to bring in crude oil by train or by pipeline directly to this refinery, where it is then it's refined into whatever the city of Moscow needs. Gasoline, diesel, and everything else that can be refined out of a single barrel of crude oil. They then load that up onto trucks, which then transport that throughout the entirety of the metropolitan area of the city of Moscow, and then deposit the diesel and gasoline for the gas stations to be able to provide to the general public, and also for the Russian army, which is based heavily around the Moscow area, to be able to load up into Urals and then ship on into their own military bases for their own internal strategic supplies, at least at a minimum for their day-to-day or weekly operations. That means that this refinery within this area of Moscow is one of the most important ones that exists for the whole capital city, and a strike on this refinery would be absolutely detrimental to the long-term fuel situation within the capital city, and maybe leading to immediate fuel shortages probably within the next several days, where the city of Moscow might run completely dry of fuel. And the Ukrainians appear to have understood the gravity of the situation as to knocking out this refinery and sent pretty much all of their attacks today directly at it. We were actually able to see some of these attacks right here in these clips. Starting off with this one here, showing the fire that had already started on the face of the refinery.
And it looks like they hit it right in the center of it, too. So it looks like it was a very accurate strike, to say the least.
It does look pretty accurate, and there's actually some more shocking stuff that we were able to get out of this one here in a minute, folks. We'll show you all the closer-up clips, but there's something that is incredibly interesting about the close-ups that we'll get to that show us something very telling about Russian drone defenses.
They're non-existent.
Oh, no, there was some existent drone defenses, but interestingly enough, they didn't work. But we'll show you all here exactly what it was in a minute when we get a close-up. But right now, we're just getting to watch the kindling fire from a distance, from afar, basically.
It's pretty solid though. Ukraine's doing this very methodically because at first they hit, I think it was like, what was it, Saturday or something? Also, that mumbling lady there in the background,
Yeah,
but
I know, it's
something
distracting
like
the hell out of me.
Something like Saturday, I think it was, Ukraine hit the Volgograd pumping station, which supplied Moscow with refined fuel products. So that was already a huge dip, and that's what caused some of those fuel shortages over the weekend. But now they're hitting the refinery literally 15 kilometers away from the Kremlin, that's literally refining fuel right there for Moscow specifically. So they're hitting both major distribution points where Russia gets their fuel from, or at least Moscow does. So clearly, Moscow is definitely the target, I would say.
And in the next clip, we can also see, speaking of the targets that were hit, this one, which is probably going to be the most telling one that we can see, at least up close, for the damage. It's right at the opening of the wall here in just a couple of seconds. There is the full-on damage as the closest angle that we got.
That's bad.
It's really bad. Like, that looks to me directly on a condenser tower or the pipelines leading right into condenser tower. So, from what we know, one of the condensers at this refinery has been completely knocked out, and we would also assume that some of the critical pipework that also transports the crude oil and the refined fuels around the refinery were also knocked out or heavily destroyed in this fire as well that was caused by the strike. And then in this last clip here, we just get to see the smoke rising from afar. I won't really show y'all that one. That one's just really more of the same. But this one is also pretty good as well, because this one is the one that's probably incredibly important as well, much like the last one we showed y'all, for showing something very important about Russian drone defenses. You can see the condenser tower is on fire here. That is definitely a condenser, without a doubt. And here in a moment, they're about to zoom out and show us something that is about to become tectonic in the kind of information we get. Do you see those little thin, wispy-looking lines going to the top of that smokestack right there?
Yeah, that wouldn't be drone nets, would it?
They are drone nets, and apparently they had these set up everywhere. They put them on the tallest smokestacks or towers throughout the entirety of the refinery and would spread them out almost like a circus tent over the whole of the refinery, protecting every single piece of it, at least in theory, from a Ukrainian drone attack. But if you notice right here, these nets clearly extended over the area of impact where that Ukrainian drone hit, and crazily enough, either the net completely failed and it just gave way, or the net just, was pushed in for the drone to hit directly on the refinery, or the net is so weak that when the FP2 hit it, it just had enough momentum to shear off the net completely and then just fly straight on through it. So it didn't work at all.
Yeah, this is why you don't want to buy your nets from China, because it's probably not going to work too well. But outside of that, though, we got to remember that Moscow has the largest concentration of missile-based Russian air defenses of anywhere in the entire Russian Federation. So for these Ukrainian drones to even make it through that missile defense perimeter that the Russians have set up around Moscow, that is embarrassing to say the least. And not to mention that their net is so cheap that it couldn't even keep the drone out. So I would say this is pretty bad. I mean, Russia's throwing the kitchen sink at Moscow, like trying to protect it, and they still can't protect it. If you got to imagine, if you are Putin and you're in the Kremlin, which was only 15 kilometers away from this location that just got hit right here, you got to be scared shitless at this point because there's nothing really protecting it for the most part.
You know what's actually interesting about that, theoretically, about the air defenses, is that in theory, this is what this drone would have had to get to, or get through, to be able to hit the Kapotnia refinery here in South Moscow. They would have had to have made it first through the S-300, S-400 air defense ring on the outskirts of the city, which in theory would have a range of about 100 miles from their launch point, meaning that from about all the way out here, basically in the middle of, let's see, what oblast is this even? The Kaluga Oblast, basically the southern end of the Kaluga Oblast. The drone technically would have to make it through the missile air defense systems, the long-range ones, for 100 miles. Then once they make it towards the inner ring road of Moscow around the A107, they then have to deal with the dozens of Pantsir air defense systems that exist within this area. These have a range of 15 to 20 miles, and there are dozens of them. I mean, usually there's so many fire arcs that are intersecting in most places in Moscow from the Pantsirs. in theory, they could be under fire from about 4 to 5 pantsiers at a time. So first they made it through all of the long-range missile air defenses, then the medium-range air defenses, then they made it through the mobile fire groups, which the mobile fire groups are just the guys on pickup trucks, which have a range of maybe a mile in the best-case scenario if they have a heavy machine gun, and then they finally made it through what we would assume to be the company's security, which would be set up around the outskirts of the oil refinery, which are using light machine guns or AKs to try and spray at the drones in a final last-ditch attempt to stop them from hitting, and they also missed. So everybody in this whole sequence missed their shot. The long-range air defenses, the medium-range air defenses, the short-range air defenses, and then the company's air defenses all missed for this drone to be able to hit. And then at the very end of it all, the net, which is supposed to be the final catch-all for these drones, just ripped apart when the drone hit it, and the drone just flew straight through and hit the refinery anyways. So it made it through what we would think is impossible odds. But I think this is starting to show us clearly that Russian air defenses, even in the huge concentrations that they exist in Moscow, really don't mean anything in the big picture for defensibility of a position. And I would assume this is also why Putin's hoarding them around his house in Valdai, because it doesn't really look like any amount or massing of Russian air defenses really is doing much of anything at this point to stop any drone attacks. So a heavily defended area in reality is about as well defended as a non-defended area in terms of air defense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It seems like a huge failure.
And we can, and also just to show y'all here, since y'all went through the whole rambling that I just had right there, how the air defenses worked and what the drones had to get through, let's reward this by watching the fire burn a little bit brighter here on this refinery. It's a beautiful fire.
That's a bad one. I think that's going to be out for quite some time, since it's a main, condenser unit that got hit.
And it's all, I gotta say, I love how the Ukrainians always go for the most critical function of the refinery. They never go for the minor ones. They always go for the condenser towers every single time, or the bases of the condenser towers where the critical pipework is.
Very juicy.
We see it continuing to burn there. And I'll cut the clip here in just a couple of seconds, folks, because we got more to talk about within the Moscow area. Because while this fire broke out today and started to burn the Kapotnia refinery basically to the ground, it appears that there were some more interesting developments within the city of Moscow today, particularly pertaining to what this drone hit, which is fuel refining capabilities and the remaining amounts of diesel and gas that are left inside of the Russian Federation. As we have started to hear today, nationwide fuel restrictions are now being implemented by Tatneft. Tatneft is a major national gas station brand, almost a nationalized gas station brand within the Russian Federation. And according to news that has come out today from inside of the Russian Federation, Tatneft has introduced a temporary limit on gasoline and diesel fuel at all gas stations inside of the Russian Federation. And at the moment, according to a Tatneft representative, at the moment, restrictions have been introduced to every single gas station across the Tatneft network. We also were able to hear that, according to the reporter, in addition to the fuel sales limit, there are restrictions and only cash is accepted as payment. I don't know why they made that a requirement, like that you had to pay in cash. I think they're trying to get around paying the Russian government taxes, so maybe they can misreport the number of income that they're making, possibly. But as reported by an Interfax correspondent, Tatneft is informing drivers at gas stations in Chelyabinsk that, for technical reasons, the maximum gasoline sale for passenger cars is 30 liters. Diesel fuel sales are limited to 60 liters, and trucks get a 300-liter diesel fuel limit. So this is becoming quite bad. And just to show you all this here really quickly, before we get on in this poll, it appears that it's desperate. But before we move further on from this map here, and before we really get into depth on explaining it, this Ukrainian attack that was conducted on the Kapotnia refinery in southern Moscow, only about 11 to 12 miles away from the Kremlin, or 15 kilometers from the Kremlin, seems to be interpreted by many as some form of revenge by Ukraine. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so the attack that we saw today was significant because not only did it hit Moscow's largest oil refinery, this attack occurred less than 15 kilometers from the Kremlin itself, which, by the way, should spook Putin quite a bit because that's extremely close. And basically, the drones could have kept going if they wanted to. There was nothing holding them back. So this comes right after Russia launched those massive strikes on the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, also hitting a monastery and hitting all kinds of civilian targets, which is obviously massive war crimes to say the least. But what do you think was the message that Ukraine was trying to send? 52% of the audience said Ukraine was getting revenge for the Kyiv strikes, while 25% said Ukraine was threatening Putin by striking very close to the Kremlin, and 20% said it's merely a normal strike to take out a strategic target. And I would say that it seems to me that it was probably already pre-planned. That's my guess, because we saw the Ukrainians strike the Volgograd oil pumping facility, which pumped refined fuel products into Moscow to sell at the gas stations. Now we're seeing that the refinery that's literally in Moscow itself is being hit right after that. So it seems like a methodical series of strikes to take out the entire refining capability that serves the capital of Moscow, literally one by one. That's what it seems like to me. And it seems like maybe just a side effect that maybe the Kremlin was close by. That seems like a side effect to me. So I'm actually with the 20%. I think it's a normal strike, and they already had this plan to go. And of course, it does prove that Russian air defense doesn't work well, but I think that was simply a side effect of it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would also have to say, I think this is a part of a larger strategic framework rather than a reciprocal attack or a revenge attack by the Ukrainians, because we had already seen that a lot of Moscow's critical fuel infrastructure within the entirety of Western Russia had already been under attack by Ukrainian drone forces in prior days, including the pumping station down at the small village of Efimovka within the Volgograd Oblast, which largely knocked out the oil lines that would even feed the fuel to that refinery that we just saw on the clip. The refinery, however, just to make it clear as to why this refinery would be hit, does house crude oil within storage tanks outside, and so as long as they had that oil to work off of, they could try and repair the pumping station down in Volgograd, and the refinery could just eat off of its oil supplies that it has in the tanks at the refinery to be able to refine and to continue to provide the city of Moscow with fuel. Striking this refinery is a way to make the impact immediate and to also make sure that they're not able to circumvent the damage that was caused down to the pumping station in Efimovka and Volgograd by just keeping the refinery running and feeding off of the fuel that they already had in storage here. So now the refinery's out and the pumping station's out, so there is quite literally a bottleneck on every end at this point, getting oil to the refinery and then the refinery actually refining any oil that it receives or has on the facility. So I would generally say that from what I would understand, this seems to be a larger strategic action because of that reason than anything that's revenge. Also, revenge attacks by the Ukrainians at this point, if we're talking about, for say, example, the Kyiv attacks, which we talked about on Sunday, a revenge attack like that by the Ukrainians would probably be a much wider reaching attack on the whole of the city of Moscow rather than a critical fuel infrastructure site. Fuel infrastructure sites, as we all know, folks, have been under attack for over a year and a half by the Ukrainian armed forces. And we've seen refineries hit in St. Petersburg, in quite literally every major city along the Volga throughout the entirety of Western Russia. We've seen that places like Tuapse, Novorossiysk, and Taman have been hit heavily, along with Ust-Luga and Primorsk. We've even seen that St. Petersburg, the historical capital of the Russian Empire, has been targeted and hit many times. And each and every single one of those times, it just doesn't really appear to be revenge. It appears to be part of a larger strategic framework on destroying the Russians' ability to export oil for money or refine oil domestically to be able to keep their economy and military running. So I'd generally be with a 25% for that reason. But if you want to look at it as revenge, there probably was a little bit of that involved in it, but that was probably more of a side thought, at least to me from what I'm seeing, than it was the primary driving reason for this attack. But moving on from that, however, we can say that these attacks, regardless whether they're revenge or a part of a larger strategic framework that happened in Moscow today, and attacks similar to it, are having a great effect on the Russian Federation and its fuel availability. This map here is actually one of the most accurate maps we've seen so far and the most up to date on the fuel shortage crisis that is now gripping the Russian Federation. this map here shows 3 different colors on the map. Gray means that the situation is largely normal and fuel supplies are generally not affected for the public. Orange, however, states that there are restrictions on sales and there are spot outages, meaning that in some places there's quite literally just no fuel within some of these oblasts. And purple is showing that there are restrictions on sale, which means that they're going to be entering, probably within the next couple of weeks, the orange group where there are spot outages, meaning that at any given moment the gas stations within the local area are just completely running out and supplies might show up, maybe the day after tomorrow or a week from now or a couple of weeks from now, or they might not ever show up again. Right now we're seeing that pretty much most of southern Russia is in a spot outage sort of a situation. That includes Krasnodar, Dagestan, this larger oblast here, which I sadly do not know the name of, the Rostov Oblast, I believe that'd be the Astrakhan Oblast, this one right here, which I also unfortunately do not know the name of. We also have the Belgorod Oblast, the Voronezh Oblast, and also the Kursk Oblast as well, all having spot outages. Every single one of these, by the way, are in the Southern Military District, which is an incredibly important thing for our considerations and analysis here on the channel. Most of the Moscow Military District is also dealing with spot outages as well. However, the Leningrad Military District is dealing with restrictions on sale or spot outages in the entirety of their military district, which is something that is incredibly interesting. Neither the Southern Military District or the Moscow Military District is as bad off as the Leningrad Military District for fuel availability, and that might actually impede or greatly decrease the chances of the Russian Federation going to war, considering that the Russian Federation's supply model largely, quote-unquote, lives off of the land, meaning that supplies have to be available very close to the area of operations that they are conducting, or the army might just starve. And considering that the Leningrad Military Oblast really doesn't have any fuel to speak of at the moment, and if they do, it's having to be rationed, the military in this area is also going to be feeling the strain of that considerably. However, in most other areas, like the Central Military District and also the Eastern Military District, the Northern Military District and the Eastern Military District, we are seeing that there are fuel outages and restrictions, but generally these areas do not have that much of an impact on the war in Ukraine directly, strategically or economically, as there's very little economic activity or really wartime activity rather than railway transportation by the Trans-Siberian Railway that's conducted east of the Ural Mountains. So really it's just the western part of Russia that's the most important. And I would have to say that out of this whole situation and the image that we're getting out of western Russia right now, the situation is increasingly grim, really for every outset. Right now in the Southern Military District, supply lines are crumbling because there is no diesel sauce. There is absolutely no way to get a supply truck down into the land bridge in Ukraine without it possibly running out of fuel, which means that a lot of those trucks may not make the arduous and dangerous journey to go and try and supply the Russian military inside of Ukraine because there's no way for them to refuel and leave. We know that all of the occupied territories are dealing with almost total outages of fuel at this point, and spot outages have appeared in every surrounding border oblast near to Ukraine. That means that the civilian logistics companies that support the Russian military will not make the decision to follow through on the contract and then drive on into Ukraine. They'll never get their truck back for the most part. We also know that in the Moscow Military District, if things go from bad to worse in Ukraine, there really isn't a way to take any of the units around Moscow or around the Moscow Oblast area and divert them down to Ukraine, at least easily, without eating into a lot of limited fuel resources, meaning that the Russians are losing their ability to take their units from the Moscow Military District and surge protect either the Leningrad Military District in a hypothetical war with NATO, or to help surge protect the Russian forces fighting in Ukraine currently, which puts them in a significant lurch, meaning that most of these military districts in the far western region of Russia are pretty much having to operate autonomously as their own. What they have is what they have to work with. And in the Leningrad Military Oblast, their situation appears to be what I could describe as the worst of them all. If they have any fuel, there's already restrictions on sales, and we would understand that if the Russian military continues a high rate of consumption compared to the civilian population, they are going to run out of fuel, meaning that the military will also have to be rationing as well. This could greatly reduce Russia's veracity to try and conduct a war with NATO, because they will not even have the fuel to keep up a minimum several-day opening offensive when they have the element of surprise, and their advance would be moving wildly slow, and also their ability to maneuver against NATO counterattacks would be nearly non-existent. So, in a sense, we can actually say this might be de-escalating the chance of a war with NATO, at least here within the immediate future, and also showing that the Russians Russian war in Ukraine is going to be going that much worse in the next coming days and weeks. But moving us on out of that map, we've also been able to hear that the fuel shortages are not just a little issue for the Russians, they're a large issue, because now we're starting to hear that they might not be making as much money in the future, as we did get to hear today that the president said the U.S. may soon tighten sanctions against Russia due to the falling oil prices. Largely, we're believing that they might be snapped back on in full form like they were before the conflict with Iran, and that could start to cause the Russians even further issues with trying to get their oil out to sea and to get it sold to any country that would be willing to buy it, where they can make some money and keep their war machine rolling. Fuel shortages have also appeared along the entirety of the Moscow-St. Petersburg highway, as seen in this clip. We can actually see one Russian complaining in his high-end Mercedes about how there's no gas anywhere and how long the fuel lines are to try and get any.
Ужас, вы просто посмотрите, что творится в Москве. Километровая пробка на заправку, мы тут уже минут 40
I love how
стоим.
they just get out in the middle of the road. Just crazy.
I mean, honestly, it's kind of just mental. Look, also, man, he had to flex. Well, naturally, my freshly painted Mercedes. Dude, that's like a late 2000s Mercedes, dude. Like,
Man, that's the old one there. I think it's like a 2007, if I'm not mistaken. He put some newer wheels on it, though. Like, that's not the same year model of Mercedes wheels that he has on that right there. So he must have bought those on eBay or something and then put them on the old Mercedes. This poor old thing right here, I can guarantee this dude's paying some crazy amounts of money for maintenance on this thing.
dude, mental amounts. Like, dude, he got out, like, trying to flex. I just had my Mercedes freshly painted. It's like, well, no dip, Sherlock. You had to have it freshly painted. With the car being that old, it was probably rusting over by the time he bought it. Of course you had to repaint it. It is the most
I would
beautiful
agree.
car. Man, look at what he said, man. He said, like, hold up, let me get this right here. This is unbelievable. It is the most beautiful car in the traffic. I doubt it. Like, I
Hell no,
doubt it.
man. There's a brand new Merc over there in the corner, like over there, like hiding off over to the right. There's a brand new one over there.
Clearly, this piece of shit is the best looking car out there on the gas queue. That looks like an AMG back there. I thought this trouble wouldn't reach us, he says. And now we can see another person showing the entire right-hand lane on the queue for the petrol station on the St. Petersburg to Moscow motorway. And it goes on forever, because there's hardly any fuel left along the whole highway. Suffice it to say, a lot of people are not going to be going on road trips throughout Russia because there's just not going to be infrastructure to support those kinds of ventures. Additionally, we also got to see the Ukrainian drone attacks were causing a humongous amount of damage in southern Russia today, as one Ukrainian drone attack was able to hit the town of Poltovskaya and its oil depot within the area. We can see the fire coming off of that oil depot in the following clips, including this one. And including the next one. And of course, including the next one. Just look at that. I'll turn up the volume for y'all. There you go. You can hear it like a rushing torrent of water out there. And we've also been able to see the continuing boiling fires off in the distance right here. And I see that apparently this poll that we've got up is getting some sort of heat right here. I see a lot of people commenting in on the live chat. It looks like this one's getting people interested in voicing their opinions. We'll have to get into this one very soon once we cover Yalta. When you see the fire continuing to boil over there in the middle of the twilight hours of the morning, once again showing the Ukrainians hitting another major fuel supply depot for the Russian Federation. We also were able to see that in Sevastopol, in the city of Yalta, famous for the Yalta Conference at the latter part of the Second World War, that there was a significant strike and fire that was caused by Ukrainian armed forces here. And we can also see one Russian with a spotlight, apparently trying to find more incoming drones down there. Man, he's waving that thing around like, oh, where, like, bro, he's freaking out.
There is no sense whatsoever to that. Look at him. It's like a rave out here.
In the middle of the inferno, too. We also got to see another clip of this inferno, or at least a picture of it up close, We don't know what they hit, however. All through the day, I have not been able to find out exactly what was hit in Yalta and where this explosion was in the city. So sadly, we don't have a lot of information as to what exactly the Ukrainians hit down in Yalta. But whatever it is burning quite heavily, and that's a decent thing to see at the least. But moving us on out of that little bit of news in Sevastopol, we also were able to hear that right now there is another Ukrainian drone attack that is ongoing, meaning that at any moment on air we might be hearing of further strikes and explosions occurring within the city of Moscow, considering that most of these drones will be making it to their targets, especially they're deep inside of Russia, about right now, actually. So pretty convenient timing as far as being on air for this. Moving us on out of that little bit of news, now we have to get on into the critical news for the day. The news that makes the Russian army's situation in Ukraine look worse by the day. But before we get on into that news of the land bridge strikes and the supply line strikes that are being conducted in the medium range areas near to the front lines, it appears that many people are currently talking about the poll that we have up on the air right now about whether or not U.S. officials actually will tighten sanctions on the Russian Federation. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so it sounds to me like the U.S. officials are saying they're going to try to put the sanctions back on Russia because recall that when the Iran situation broke out and the oil prices started skyrocketing because the Strait of Hormuz was closed, the U.S. came up with this really weird logic where they said, let's lift the sanctions on Russia that's been in place since the Ukraine war started to punish Putin for starting the war. Let's just lift that temporarily and let Russia start selling their oil to bring the oil price down globally. But plot twist, that's not the way it actually works in the real world. So nobody's really sure why they did that, but now they're saying that they're going to put the sanctions back on Russia now that the Iran situation is, knock on wood, over. They say it's not really over. We'll get into that a little bit later, but they're going to say they're going to put the sanctions back on Russia, and also not only that, but they're now negotiating to let Ukraine license build the Patriot missile interceptors inside of Ukrainian territory. Now, once again, all this is being talked about, but it's not guaranteed as of right now. So what do you think? 50% said the U.S. will give Russia a pass yet again, while 30% said the U.S. will begin punishing Russia soon with those sanctions, and 15% said I'm 50-50 on this one. And I'll be honest with you, folks, I don't have a whole bunch of, let's say, hope or kind words to say right now about the U.S. position toward Ukraine. Sadly, it's been very weak, and sometimes it's been downright malicious toward the Ukrainians for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So I'm not entirely confident that all of a sudden we're going to start treating Ukraine properly. I don't really think that. Luckily, though, regardless of what happens, Ukraine is putting their own kinetic sanctions on the Russian oil, so they're doing it for us, basically. And also, not only that, but they're now very close to releasing their own version of ballistic missiles and anti-ballistic missiles as well, which basically would replace the Patriot interceptors to a large degree. So, thankfully for Ukraine, they're largely independent to a large degree. So they really don't need this to happen. It would obviously help, but it's not going to be required to say the least. So I'm actually with the 50%. I think the U.S. might give Russia a pass again because they have a preference for Putin, and I don't really see that changing. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that unfortunately, folks, I would be with the 50% as well. The U.S. is probably going to give the Russians a pass, and I have a feeling this is how this is going to go, folks. I can tell you, it's textbook at this point. The president's going to go, well, I think we ought to give missiles to Ukraine, let them license build. Putin's going to call up and go, Mr. President, we're like the dove, we love peace. Oh, really? Stop the missiles. And then that'll be the end of that. And you need to talk to him, Zelensky. It's all your fault. And then it'll end up going nowhere. That's how it's going to go.
Man, I've seen the Ukrainians already. And also, by the way, folks, you can feel however you want to feel about it. Like, it's up to y'all how y'all feel about it. But the last time the U.S. got focused on Ukraine and trying to bring the conflict to an end, it was the most like hair-pulling event that I think I've ever seen. Like the Ukrainians were sick and tired of it. Even the Russians got sick and tired of it. And it was generally favoring the Russians the entire time negotiations were going on. But even the Russians said eventually, shut the hell up, United States. We're not going to do this anymore. It's a roller coaster and we're stopping. And then finally, after both the Ukrainians and Russians bowed out, then the United States said, we're going to stop focusing on it. We're going to start focusing on Iran. And you don't know how that went.
Oh, no, it was Venezuela first, remember? And then
that's right. Yes, right. I forgot. It was Venezuela, and then they jumped toward Iran. Honestly, like, You just got to be very careful with the U.S. getting involved with stuff like in foreign policy right now. That can turn into a clown show like within 5 seconds, like when the U.S. gets involved in something right now. So the Ukraine does not really want them involved again. Of course, they would love to have more Patriot interceptors, but they really don't want the U.S. to get like fully like knee deep into it again because it was an absolute clown show last time.
Yeah, I would have to say, folks, I don't think that there's going to be any hope on the horizon of the United States providing the licensing rights to Ukraine to produce Patriots domestically, and I also don't think that the U.S. is going to be snapping sanctions on in full force on the Russians. They'll come up with some BS reason as to why they're not going to do that. That is fine, however. That is completely fine because the Ukrainians are just going to blow up the export terminals anyways. So it really doesn't, like, honestly, folks, the truth is the U.S. could go completely opposite and give Ukraine no licensing rights for the Patriots, and they could also give them absolutely no help at all and just lift all of the sanctions on Russia. And the Ukrainians would still be blowing up the oil ports in Russia to the point that they can't export hardly anything like they're doing right now. If anything, the Ukrainians would make sure to escalate their attacks against Russian oil loading ports to make sure that not a single drop of oil gets out of the country, sanctions or not. So luckily, the Ukrainian strategic situation doesn't really rely as heavily anymore on the United States and the, I guess you could say, international backing that it used to, because now Ukrainian armed forces and their capabilities are more than competent enough to deal with the problem entirely on their own, sanctions or not. So regardless of what the U.S. is going to do, which I generally assume that they're going to do absolutely nothing helpful, if anything will be harmful, the Ukrainians will be able to mitigate that with their own might.
Yeah, also, by the way, Ukraine has a cheat code up their sleeve that they haven't really talked about yet. If Ukraine suddenly developed nuclear weapons out of the blue and then the U.S. got involved, there's a high chance that the U.S. might lob $300 billion their way to do away with those nuclear weapons, possibly. So that could, fund the end of the war, basically, inside of Ukraine and Russia. That could fund Ukraine to finish off the Putin regime if they suddenly, develop weapons of mass destruction and then the U.S. had to negotiate their way out of that situation by giving them, hundreds of billions of dollars.
Man, like, I hate you, Zelensky. I can't stand you. We have a nuclear bomb and we'll use it on anyone. Here's 400 billion. Best of wishes. Like, man, like, I wish you the best. Really, I do. But, who knows? Like, that might actually happen one day. I did hear, folks, that the Ukrainians, based off of the example we're seeing down in the Strait of Hormuz in Iran today, I've heard that they're getting into this idea of aggressive assistance, which is where you basically, like, stick someone up, like a robbery, basically, and just demand money from them. And if it's targeted in the United States, they might just give you the money. You never know. Anyways, moving on out of those jokes, and y'all see why. If y'all haven't heard the news today out of Iran, y'all are going to be seeing why very soon as to why that we're saying that today. But it is time for us to get on and into the rest of the news that we were able to see from the land bridge area in Ukraine today, because these attacks today, man, they're getting rough. Like, they're getting really bad. The Ukrainians are now going on a targeted campaign to destroy every standing bridge in the occupied territories. And I'm not even exaggerating. Some of y'all would think that sounds a little bit exaggerated. They can't be targeting every single standing bridge in the land bridge area and in the occupied territories. And no, I am not exaggerating whatsoever. They have quite literally isolated Crimea completely today. As many of y'all will know, the bridge at Armyansk was destroyed several days ago. The bridge at Chonhar was destroyed a week ago. And after the Russians set up a pontoon bridge there, the Ukrainians then went and destroyed the pontoon bridge, meaning that both major entrances into Crimea, the Armyansk bridge and the Chonhar bridge over the Chonhar Gap, have both been destroyed. This left the Henichesk Spit and the Henichesk bridges as the only way technically into Crimea, although due to the distance involved in driving that route and also the lack of real road infrastructure on the Henichesk Spit, it's largely impossible for Russian semi-trucks to actually make it into the area of Crimea off of the Henichesk Spit. That did not stop the Ukrainians, however, from obliterating the bridges leading to it. And we got to see here on this satellite footage, which I sadly wish I could enlarge it for y'all. Y'all can't really see it too well here. You can see 4 giant pot marks on the main road bridge heading into the Henichesk Spit. And the Russians have declared that the bridge is out. So we now understand that every single bridge entrance into Crimea, except for the Crimean Bridge, is completely out of action. And the Kerch Bridge, mind you all, it has a 1.5 ton limit on it at the moment for the road bridge, meaning that no supply trucks can cross there. So now, as of today, every single access without a shadow of a doubt, has been completely destroyed in the Crimea. Crimea has been turned into an artificial island because of these Ukrainian attacks, as there is no a way by road or by rail at this point to travel in the Crimea. Well, actually, the railroad bridge down on the Crimean Bridge still is operational. That's one of the ways that has been unaffected to get into Crimea. But as far as its current effect on the Crimean supply side situation, the railroad bridge to the Kerch Strait appears to be completely non-existent in that effect. Meanwhile, we also saw that the Ukrainian armed forces did conduct some major strikes on drone forces within the Mariupol city area, which is a major supply hub and operational hub for Russian rear-line support forces. And we see them here showing the geographical location of Mariupol, which we all know quite dearly. And then they're about to show
Also,
us
by the way, can we start calling Crimea the island of Crimea? Like, I know, like, it's always going to be Crimea, like Crimea River, they say for the Russians these days. Yeah, really got to cry 'em a river, or at least they're going to cry themselves a river. Might create a whole new body of water doing that. But I would love to call it the island of Crimea. It just has such a good ringtone to it.
the Crimea Isle.
The Isle of Crimea.
Yeah, I like that one. The Isle of Crimea. We'll call it that from here on. The Isle of Crimea. No one's ever heard of such. But we can see them blowing up the drone operational facility in Mariupol. And then after that, the Ukrainians decided to take a little joyride on up into Donetsk, and they blew up the bridge into the city of Donetsk. This one right here. It's gone. Completely knocked out from what we know.
Oh. Man, I tell you what, it's not a good day to be a bridge inside the occupied territories. Definitely not. It seems like these are bridges over troubled waters, it seems like.
Man, bridges over very troubled waters. Every single road access, I'm not even kidding, every single road access that has to cross a bridge is being targeted and destroyed by the Ukrainians. And if the Russians ever pull out a pontoon bridge, they just come back and blow that up, meaning that once they blow up the actual bridge, the Russians have no way to cross the river any longer. They might set up a pontoon bridge, but they're going to lose it, and those are incredibly rare at this point, and they can't just set one up every time a bridge is knocked out. So now we're understanding that the accesses into Donetsk are being severed. All of the accesses into Crimea are gone, and we also understand that they're now trying to attack and destroy the bridges that exist on the M14 highway, the very little that exist, heading to Melitopol. So they're quite literally systematically destroying every single access to any supply node within the whole of the occupied territories at this point. So I do have to say, it's unbelievably impressive, and I've never seen a campaign like this before. Destroying bridges, folks, in the military sense, is like a logistician's wet dream for what can happen to enemy forces. If you destroy every single bridge, you generally are cutting off the enemy entirely from supply. And now they're doing it everywhere, like the Ukrainians are at least. So it is one hell of a hoot to watch it happen, because while the Ukrainians are rejoicing with glee that with each bridge destroyed, several hundred tons of supply are going to either be slowed down significantly in making it to the front, or they're just not making it to the front at all, the Russians, on the other hand, are ripping their hair out because everybody on the front line is still expending ammunition, still eating, and still consuming fuel, and there's absolutely no way to get any more to them, or there's going to be heavily reduced amounts getting to them up there on the Donetsk front or anywhere else. We also got to see today that because of this problem, there's been a crazy thing that happened in Makivka. The gas price in Makivka for AI 95 petrol, which is regular unleaded in the United States, is 120 rubles per liter, which equates to $6.27 a gallon.
Oh my goodness, that's bad. $6.27 a gallon for normal unleaded like octane. That's insane. Also, by the way, remember, folks, like we quote these prices in USD all the time inside of the Russian gasoline price situation. But remember that is way worse than it sounds like, because the average monthly Russian salary is just about $1,100 a month. That's their normal average salary inside of Russia in USD. So for them, I mean, that's what, if you translate that for the proportion of their income to the price and sort of compare it to the American income, they are paying, that's probably more like equivalent like $20 a gallon in reference to us.
Man, it is unbelievable how expensive this is. And that's if you can find it, because the Donetsk region is in a fuel shortage. So this is if you can find fuel. You're paying $6.27 A gallon. That's unbelievable. Like it's absolutely insane. And I also see some people misunderstanding some stuff because someone said a liter's not a gallon. Well, if you take enough liters to make a gallon, it's $6.20 a gallon. If you see what's being done, it's conversions for our American audience because yeah, a liter isn't a gallon, but you got to convert it to make it understandable for our American audience, which makes up most of our viewership. But moving us on out of that, we've also been able to see that around Donetsk City, in the midst of everything that happened today, the major bridge into Donetsk getting blown up, the gas prices skyrocketing next door in Makivka, the Russians were desperately trying to ward off the drones, and this is what it looked like over the city. Just unfettered chaos. Nobody knows what they're shooting at. They're just hoping they're hitting something.
Also, by the way, I'm trying to do some quick math real quick, by the way. I'm trying to do a calculation here to get an idea of how much of the Russians' monthly salary is being spent on fuel. So what percentage is, let's see here. I'll do this on the side, and I'll report back to you what it is, or likely spending percentage of their income per month just on gasoline.
And hopefully we'll be able to get an answer to that here really soon, because the situation not only inside of mainland Russia, but in the occupied territories is even worse. And it does look like at the moment the Russian Federation is dealing with lack of supply, lack of munitions, lack of fuel, lack of food, lack of basic materials. It is absolutely horrendous. And now we're going to hear how bad it really is for the average income of a Russian. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so if your average Russian goes to the gas station at that price that you just saw and they fill up their car, like a full tank, like 4 to 5 times a month, which is what it's probably going to take to get to and from work, depending on the average distance to a Russian workplace, they're going to be spending roughly about 376 USD per month on gasoline alone. And their monthly salary on average is about $1,100 a month. So that's about 35% of their entire monthly salary is going just to gasoline. That's just for gasoline for their car. That's not including the maintenance on their car, their rent that they're paying, or whatever type of house they own inside of Russia, all their food expenses, all insurance. That's not counting anything. That's 35% of their income, and that's gross, by the way, is going straight to gasoline. That's insane.
Oh my God. Like, that is terrible. That is bad. Like, when you think about that, when you really think about that, having to spend like 35% of your income on gas is basically, I think, the average amount most Americans spend on taxes most year, if I'm not mistaken, percentage-wise, which is pretty damn bad.
Yeah. I think the rule in finances is like for your rent, like for example, when you're renting a place like an apartment or a townhome or whatever, you're supposed to keep your monthly rent. I think it's like under like 50 or 40% of your gross monthly income to be considered doing well. That's what you're supposed to be budgeting for, I believe, if I have the rule correct in my memory. But the Russians are spending basically their rent percentage on gasoline, so that's untenable. Like you simply cannot. You'd have to start walking at that point. Like that might be what the Russians are doing. They're using bikes, they're walking or something, because a Russian can't afford that kind of money right there. That's just simply too much for gasoline.
I wonder how much vodka is in Russia. It might just be cheaper to buy vodka from the liquor store at this point and just pour it in the tank and let the engine explode.
Yeah, maybe. So also, by the way, people are saying it's 30% for rent. So actually that's worse than I thought. So the Russians are spending 35% of their monthly gross income on gasoline when you're technically only supposed to spend 30% per month on rent of your gross monthly income. So they're spending more on gas than they would on rent.
Golly. Right, that's insane. So basically, after rent and after gas, about 70% of their entire income has been expended for the month.
Yeah, basically. So I'll say this though, that 30% number that everybody's quoting right there, I don't know who in America is keeping their rent under 30% of their gross monthly income. You'd have to be a miracle worker to be doing that at this point. So I think with the rent prices going sky high, they need to revise that rule.
Man, in this economy, like, no way. Like, man, impossible. But outside of that, though, a lot of people are also talking, speaking of which, about the Crimean Peninsula and the rising price of living there, considering the lack of supply. As many of y'all will know, the elementary model of supply and demand, the supply in Crimea is very small, and the demand is very big. And so a lot of people are talking about the disparity right now, and the fact that it doesn't really seem that anyone's going to be able to, bus in anything else into Crimea. So, Matthew, what are people thinking about that situation right now, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so now that the third wave of strikes is taking place by the Ukrainians on Russia's bridges connecting Crimea and the occupied Ukrainian territories, what are your thoughts? 58% said Crimea is permanently cut off as of these third wave of strikes. 20% said Russia will never be fully cut off, and 15% said Russia may restore the bridges and it could get back in. And I would say at this point, folks, you got to imagine how demoralizing this is for the Russians. They keep putting up pontoon bridges just to get them destroyed less than 24 hours later. And just to keep in mind, by the way, the Russians have a very limited supply of pontoon bridges. So there's one of two things that are going to happen here. Either the Russians are going to give up trying to cross over those streams and rivers and things like that, and they're going to simply give up on crossing from Crimea to the occupied territories inside of Ukraine, or they'll keep on putting pontoon bridges out there to keep getting destroyed, and then they'll simply run out and they'll be cut off anyway. So I'm with the 58%. Crimea is already pretty much cut off, and at this point, it's just a waiting game for the Ukrainians. They're basically like a prey animal, or more like a predator over there, looking at the prey animal over there dying in the corner, which is the Russians, and they're just waiting for it to croak, basically. So I would say, to me, I think Crimea is permanently cut off because every single time the Russians bring something in, it's going to get hit yet again, and they're going to lose it. So, I mean, how does Russia get across? They don't. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that Crimea is completely cut off. The pontoon bridge they laid down at Chandhar was blown up within days, and considering that the Russians do not have millions of pontoon bridges to keep laying out, that largely has sealed the fate of Crimea to a complete loss. There's really no way for them to set up a ferry or a barge within the area either, as they don't really have the ability to get one into any of these areas to be able to ferry equipment across, and the NHS spit is completely unusable. That's even if a truck makes it to Crimea, because the fuel situation is so bad leading to Crimea that most trucks won't have the range to drive in and drive out, considering that Crimea is completely deprived of any fuel. So I would say that Crimea has been completely cut off, and also I would have to add by extension, although we don't talk about this a whole lot in our analysis, Kherson Oblast is also completely cut off as well. It is as far away and as isolated as Crimea, and although there isn't really a lack of bridge access into Kherson, much like Crimea, the fuel shortage problem is already going to be stopping any trucks from making it to Kherson, so they're in the same situation as well, bridges or not. But I would definitely be with the 58% on this situation. Crimea is definitely cut off. I guess you could say, what does Crimea and some Russians late night at the bar have in common? They're both cut off. Oh, but anyways, well, actually, they don't cut people off in Russia. They just let you get drunk until you drop dead. But anyways, moving us on out of that news in the rear line areas, and of all of the strikes the Ukrainians conducted against the Russian Federation today, it's now time for us to move on into a treat. Y'all have made it an hour into the show. It's time for some goodies. And there's no better goodie than the clip I'm about to show y'all. We got to see that a Tu-22 M3 strategic bomber crashed in Irkutsk yesterday.
No way. Not a whole bomber.
A whole bomber. Want to see it?
Oh, oh dear.
Let's take a gander. And it's gone.
Yikes, that's not normal.
I don't think they're supposed to do. I don't think that's how they're supposed to land by the manual.
Yeah, that thing went down like a rock. I've never seen anything quite fall like that. It was like falling with grace, but didn't have grace when it hit. It was definitely a bit of a ugly sight. That's wild to see a bomber that large just falling like that.
Man, I guess you could say that it kind of bombed it flying, but man,
What caused it to come down though? Like why did it come down? Was it shot down or what happened?
It wasn't shot down. It looks to be some sort of pilot failure. Also, one thing that we can see. This is definitely pilot failure. Do you notice that in the stall that the ailerons at the back of the plane are actually elevated to the full elevation level, which would be pulling the aircraft up? They panicked.
Yeah, I don't think he had enough altitude to properly do a stall recovery. He was too low. Like in a stall recovery, by the way, folks, I'm obviously not a pilot, but from what I've heard from pilots, is you typically want to push the nose down in a stall because you're trying to gain airspeed. So that way you regain lift over the wings. So that way you can pull out a stall. But you don't want to pull up in a stall because then you exacerbate the problem. It starts losing more lift, and you're just going to do exactly what this aircraft did right here and fall straight into the ground. So I see some people say maybe it ran out of fuel. I mean, would the Russians run out of fuel like that in a bomber?
I mean, they would be stupid enough to underfuel it. I mean, that's not out of the question.
Yeah, it could be they ran out of gas, maybe. I mean, they could have been low on gas because we know they're having a fuel shortage, and now all of a sudden they're like barely filling up the bombers or something. I don't know. Like, it seems absurd.
I would say, folks, that probably the most likely thing that I could think of that led to this crash, in my opinion, I'm just thinking out the story in my head based off of all the air disasters that I know, is that somewhere along the flight, because it's the Russian military and they're idiots, is that this guy tried to pull a high G maneuver in a bomber, because notice that the wings are fully extended, so whatever they were doing, they were moving at slow speed. So he tried to pull a high G maneuver at slow speed, slipped it out of its airfoil, and then it entered a flat spin as a result at an altitude probably a couple of thousand feet up. They probably panicked and kept pushing upwards on the joystick to try and pull up out of the flat spin because the nose was probably facing down at that point. And then at some point, they might have tried to aim the nose downwards just a little bit, or it might have just stayed in the flat spin the whole way, and they just kept pulling backwards on the stick trying to pull it up out of the flat spin, which then created another problem because of how the angle the plane is spinning. The fuel for the jet engines, which is the air going through the intakes into the combustion chambers, which then produces the heat that spins the turbines, wasn't flowing in properly. The engine stalled, making recovery completely impossible, and these guys basically just sentenced themselves to death in their own bomber. That looks to me like what it might have been.
Maybe so. That's just wild right there. Also, unfortunately, while the Russians are crashing their bombers, unfortunately, here in the United States, I think a B-52 crashed out in Edwards Air Force Base. I think it was yesterday, I believe. It was an unfortunate, horrible sight out there. By the way, I think we'll cover that during the question segment. I see some people asking questions about that, but unfortunately, we lost a bomber too. That's the sad part.
Yeah, we did lose a bomber. Sadly, we don't have that in our coverage tonight, but just to give you all a little bit of a summary on it, a B-52 crashed shortly after takeoff at Edwards Air Force Base. Unfortunately, all 8 crew members of the B-52 did die during the crash, and the B-52H was also lost during the training incident that occurred in that in that situation. So a very unfortunate one to hear of, but we actually did not have that in our news coverage tonight. So that's a brief summary of what happened at Edwards. I also see a lot of people saying that, well, it looks to be in almost a dive spin, not a flat spin. Well, yeah, that's why I was saying that at one point they might have tried to recover, but then the airspeed's too low, because if they push it out of a flat spin, which is doable, and a low enough altitude, while they've kind of pushed it out of the flat spin, they're still in a dive at low altitude, at low speed. Recovery isn't really possible at that point, and that's why I added in the scenario. They probably got in a flat spin at some point higher up, tried to get out of it, and then once they are out of it, then they try and pull back on the joystick like we saw right there to pull it up and out, but the engines had already stalled because they didn't have any air flowing through them to keep the engines running. Once an engine stalls, you have to restart it. That takes a good long while, even in a perfect scenario, so they just didn't have any ability to escape at this point, and the aircraft was lost with all crew on board. So I hope that explains that well, at least what I was trying to say. Maybe I miscommunicated that. But moving us on out of that bit of news in Irkutsk, it is now time for us to move on to the British news in the English Channel. Before we get on into that, however, I do want to say a huge thanks to everybody who has been watching so far tonight. We have had 14.3 thousand people here at the peak tonight, and about 54,000 people have watched the stream in the first hour. I've got to say that we're entirely thankful and extremely appreciative of each and every single one of y'all watching this channel so far tonight. I hope y'all have been enjoying this news. We always try our best to make sure that it's well summarized, well analyzed, and well covered, and I hope that we've done a good job of that so far tonight, as we still have a lot of news to go to cover, and we hope that y'all still be around with us during those times, because we got some very crazy news that came out of the English Channel today, and also out of the middle of the East, which we're about to be getting into here really quickly, and we're probably just going to cover it and move on like we've been doing for the past few days. Seems like a crowd pleaser. Definitely a crowd pleaser for me. But outside of that,
I would say the Middle East today has actually kind of gotten interesting. Like, it doesn't seem like things are as straightforward as they were, less than 48 hours ago. So, and to me, I think people are going to find that segment interesting tonight.
I think maybe, but I have a feeling that we're probably going to have to be battling out the elements of reality versus people who don't like to live in reality. I have a feeling that's probably going to be coming, but we'll have to see, folks, because the news is the news. We just have to report what we have. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but this is the real world. Everything doesn't go in a way that makes everyone happy. So outside of that, though, we are going to get some questions before we move on into all of this news that we have for the rest of the night, and all the frontline news we have out of Ukraine, which is pretty significant as well today. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so getting our first three super chats, getting right back to our breaking news out of the Ukraine and also out of the Middle East as well. We had a $50 support right here from Nick Hines. And thank you very much, Nick, for that $50 support right there.
Hey!
Very generous and helping to keep the channel running with that support. And I know we say it like a broken record every single night, but it's the super chatters on the live streams that keep our entire channel running. And we sincerely do appreciate all that support y'all throw in night after night. And Nick said, LOSA forever. And do you think Ukraine will keep hitting the Moscow refinery to the point it creates another two ops situation in Moscow?
Oh, that's a good question. Technically, they could. Like, they definitely could do that. There's enough tanks there at the Kapotnia refinery to do such a thing. I'm not really sure if they would, though. That's kind of my thing. I'm not really sure. They might think that that would create a panic in Moscow where they overreact and do something rash. And so that might stop them from doing it, because we do see that Ukraine's attacks against Moscow have become a little bit more reserved recently after the rationing strikes. Although they're still hitting Moscow, they're not trying to gun right for central Moscow around the Kremlin anymore, it seems. So I would say that they probably wouldn't. But the Ukrainians always leave us pleasantly surprised. Like, if anything, we always under-expect what the Ukrainians are going to be able to do, and then they far exceed anyone's expectations. So they might hit it. I'm not entirely sure. But for now, I would say with the kind of running record that we have so far after the last rationing attack on Ukraine at Belozervka, I would say probably not. They're probably going to be a little bit more reserved about it, but they are going to continue their attacks strategically against the refinery to knock out the refining complex. But as far as creating a major situation over the largest metropolitan center in Moscow, I would be a little bit doubtful. But a big thanks to your support, Nick, and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you and the entirety of the Lee Spring Army that go out of their way to support this channel that make this thing possible. Thanks to folks like you and your crowdfunding, we're able to keep this thing ad-free and sponsor-free, and have been able to for 1,574 days of war. And I've got to say that we're massively appreciative of folks like you who go of your way to support this channel and also ask really interesting questions, so that way we can make this thing possible for millions of people who watch this channel every month and consider this channel to be their primary source of news. And so a humongous thanks to you so much once again, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And this one goes to Michael Danianko. And hopefully I'm saying your name right, Michael, but thank you very much for that, by the way. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to sound ignorant here, but is that last name Ukrainian right there, or am I mistaken?
It sounds Ukrainian to me, possibly, but I'm not sure. It might be another Eastern European last name.
Maybe so, but let us know, Michael. But we do appreciate that $50 support, by the way. I believe that is your first ever support on the channel as a whole, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And Michael said, a long-time listener, but first-time donating to your channel. I've been watching you guys for a few years now, and I appreciate your hard work and keeping it real with the facts, unlike most other news channels, and just want to say thank you.
And I thank you so much for the support on that. And I've got to say, Michael Danico, we are greatly appreciative of knowing that folks like you have been getting a lot of quality, hopefully, out of this channel for years. And I also think that's a great thing that we always hear folks say, that they don't have to support with a single cent. It was generally my objective at the very beginning of the channel, before Matthew even joined, to make sure that if we provide the news, people can go over their way to supporting. And that support, of course, is crucial to helping us to keep this thing running, because it helps us to be able to pay our bills, keep our lights on, and do this as a full-time job. It's our pay, quite literally. It's our bread and butter. But at the same time, I always wanted it to be free for everyone to be able to watch. I wanted the barrier to entry for people to be able to get on the show and listen to the news every day to be absolutely nil. I didn't want anyone to have to spend a second of their time watching an ad or listening to a sponsorship on the live streams. I just wanted them to get in and watch. And if people enjoyed the show, they would support it. And if they didn't, the channel would slowly fade away and die. And we've been able to keep that up for years. And I'm happy to hear that you've been watching for years and this is your first time supporting. Stories like those are exactly what I was looking for when I founded the channel like years ago. And since Matthew and me have been running it, we've been hearing stories like that for years. We're both incredibly grateful to hear that people get hopefully the most honest news they hear every day, and they don't have to spend a second of their time or a dime if they didn't want to get the news. But outside of that, I also got to thank you for really appreciating us keeping it real. Keeping it real is tough. Like, you know, a lot of people don't really see the kind of heat that we usually get behind the scenes from people, or even on air, because usually we're pretty quick to get rid of it. But going the road down the middle and just reporting the news for what it is, the good, the bad, and the ugly, ends up getting you you, absolute heat and hate from every single side. And a lot of people end up folding to that hate, and they end up picking one side or another. So then you end up hearing basically what in America turns out to be all Democrat news or all Republican news. It makes the Republicans sound like angels and the Democrats sound like demons, or you get the Democrats are angels and the Republicans are demons. And you don't even get really a view on what's going on in the world because they're so focused on paying attention to what's happening inside the country. And I got to appreciate folks like you who support the channel for the reason that we don't hold back. We report the news for what it is, and we report the good and the bad and the ugly, no matter who's doing it or why it's happening. Folks like you help us to be able to keep a voice like that on air, and I got to thank you greatly for appreciating it, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we just would have never been able to make it possible. We still wouldn't be able to make it possible, and we wouldn't be able to report news like we do. And so humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best we possibly can. And with that, we are on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news for the night.
All right, and our last one of the segments, a massive $200 support from Andrew Hebert. And thank you very much, Andrew, for that massive $200 support, by the way. That is the largest support of the night, and also extremely generous of you, by the way. And thank you very much for helping to keep our channel running. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say, an unbelievably massive support, Andrew Hebert, for helping this channel to keep on running. You didn't even throw in a comment. I would love to address something that you had said. But the support says a lot in itself, and I got to thank you so much for putting a whole load into this channel and wanting to support it to help us to keep this thing running, because folks like you make the thing possible. You help us to be able to keep everything going behind the scenes to where we can sit down every day and focus on this as a full-time job and cover this news like it's our livelihood, because it is, and it has been for 1,574 days. And I got to thank you greatly for that. I have to say that Matthew and me are just absolutely appreciative of all the kind words we get in the chat and all the support that people throw in the super chats, because quite literally, without y'all, this wouldn't be possible. There's no angel donors behind the scenes that keep us on air. There's no magic money that flows in from somewhere else like sponsorships or ads on these live streams. It's entirely y'all. Every single one of y'all is what has made this channel into what it is. And I know that a lot of people always put in their super chats a big thanks to us for running the show, but it's really a huge thanks to our super chatters who support us so that way we can be on air and do this. If it wasn't for the super chatters, we wouldn't be able to continue this channel on another day, because we would be hungry, we would have no lights, we would have nowhere to live, we would have to get another job. And I gotta thank folks like you amazingly for that. So a humongous thanks to you so much once again. And with that, it is time for us to move on and into the rest of the news for the night. Moving us on into the English Channel, we've been able to hear of a wild story today, and this story is not an exaggeration by any extent. Right now, the G7 summit is currently being held. Generally, we're not covering that on air tonight. There hasn't been any developments that have come out of it, so I just completely redacted any of that. But just to let y'all know, the G7 summit is going on right now. In the midst of the G7 summit, the Russian Navy has fired warning shots incredibly close to a British yacht in the English Channel. The vessel that fired the shots was the Russian frigate, the Admiral Grigorovich, which can be seen pictured here. This vessel has been involved heavily in Russian maritime naval operations around the area of British waters, and also Irish waters as well. And we have noted and reported on this vessel a multitude of times over the years, not only around the area of the United Kingdom, but sometimes in faraway expeditions to other regions of the world completely. This vessel apparently used its main gun, from what we understand, to fire these warning shots with live rounds at a British yacht. Now, it sounds interesting when we say a British yacht. It sounds like they fired at a super yacht that like Jeff Bezos or somebody would own. But y'all are going to be shocked at what they actually fired at. They fired at this boat right here. This is actually a picture of the vessel they fired at, which is a small sailing boat.
That's not exactly what you'd call a yacht by any means. Definitely not. I would say calling that a yacht is kind of being generous.
Yeah, it's a small little sailboat that is named the Bright Future, that is owned by an old couple of British pensioners that were out basically on holiday, sailing around the English Channel, and the Russians decided to pick on these old pensioners here and fire warning shots very close to their vessel. I would expect terrorizing the folks on board for no reason. Just because. The reason why they did this is retaliation for the British seizing that shadow tanker just a couple of days ago with the Royal Marine Commandos, and this is Britain's response, is to terrorize a civilian sailing boat in international waters in the English Channel. which is absolutely absurd. Like, unbelievable, really, that they would even conduct an action like this. So far, we haven't really heard any statements by the British government about this incident publicly or what they're going to be doing to respond, but it is one hell of an act, to say the least, to fire live shots, warning shots, that is, around the proximity of two old people, a married couple, on their little sailing boat. Kind of ridiculous, if you ask me. Y'all actually would not be shocked, probably, to hear that this isn't the first time that the Russians have fired at small boats within the English Channel. There was a time, a long time ago, in a Earth that's far, far away from here, that the Russians actually did this back in the day. And that was actually on their way to the Battle of Tsushima, where the entire Russian Navy got curb stomped by the Imperial Japanese Navy. But when they passed through the area, y'all wouldn't believe it, but the Baltic fleet that the Russians had sent out in 1904 went through the English Channel back in the day, and in the middle of the night, they said, "Oh my God! It's the Japanese!" And they started firing at every single small boat in the area. It turns out what they were firing at were British fishing boats that kind of looked a lot like that one. And they almost got into a war with Britain because of that. Because back then, folks, if you shot at the citizens of a country, generally that was not taken too well, and people were usually willing to kill over that kind of stuff. So the Russians had to go to the British and ask them, "Please don't do anything. We beg of you. Our Navy just, went stupid for a little minute, and they fired at your fishing boats. But, we really didn't mean anything by it. We're not trying to go to war with you." And the British barely avoided going to war with Russia because of that situation. Nowadays, the Russians fire at a sailing boat deliberately, and then the British don't even make a response within the day, which I'd have to say is pretty ridiculous, and I would say pretty cowardice, considering that, in my honest opinion, if someone had done something like this to American citizens, I would have expected the United States to blow the frigate out of the water. Whatever came after that would come after that, but I'd be damned if anybody be firing at a U.S. citizen in open international waters. That's absolutely ridiculous. But right now, a lot of people are talking about what the British should have done, and it looks like a lot of y'all are agreeing with me in my analysis on what the British should have done. So, Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so about this crazy situation right here with the Russian warship largely just picking a fight with some old people on a boat out here near the English Channel, which is I'm crazy as hell on its face, by the way. So there was apparently no provocation. Also, by the way, there's really no way to provoke a naval vessel like with a sailboat like this. It's obviously not a threat. So Russia clearly did this to make a point. So what should have happened? 52% said Britain should have fired back, while 17% said it was probably best to just ignore it for now, kind of like they did, and 25% said Britain should invoke NATO Article 4 and convene together the allies about the situation. And honestly, I know some people are going to take this to be a little bit extreme, but if I was in charge of Britain, I would have fired back at the bastard and sunk that ship. That's what I would have done if I was in charge of Britain. That's insane for a foreign enemy nation to pull up basically next to England's coast and start firing at their civilians. Even if it's warning shots, they're still firing at civilians and endangering their lives. To me, that's about as close to an act of war as it gets without actually firing on Britain itself. So I would say personally, I don't know why Britain didn't send out a ship to combat the Russians doing that. They had no right whatsoever to start firing at, old people on a boat like that. So I don't know. There was literally no response. And also, by the way, Starmer just boarded, or he got his forces to go board that commercial vessel that was alleged to be a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker. He did that and made a huge photo op out of it. But clearly, he does not have the resolve to actually defend his people. That's obvious at this point. And I think the Russians detected that, and that's why they went for this action today. So, Enforcer, what say you?
Sadly, folks, when we get to the Middle East, this is going to be a reoccurring story with the United States as well today, sadly. But on this situation, really on all situations that deal with the sovereignty of one's nation and the protection of their citizens, this should have resulted in a large response. From what we know, a British vessel was nearby when the incident occurred, and I want to make sure that I get the name of this vessel. Let's see here. Damn, I can't find the name of the vessel. Let me go pull up the Royal Navy ships, because I'll be able to know the name of it when I see it was a name that started with an M. And so let me go down the list. It was the HMS. Was it the HMS Mersey? I think it was. Oh, and no. It was the HMS Medway, which is a river-class offshore patrol vessel. I'll show you all this one right here. This was the British vessel that was nearby when the incident occurred, which it isn't extremely armed in terms of firepower. It is a patrol boat. However, there was a ship within the area that could respond. And however you look at it, and I know that a lot of people these days don't like to create incidents because for some reason a lot of people in the West are spineless, sadly, these days. But here's how I look at it, folks. If I'm the president of the United States, I'd be damned if anybody fires on an American. If anybody fires on an American, they better pray to whoever God they believe in, because they're not going to be there for them, and they're not going to be getting mercy from the U.S. government. That's what I would say. With the Russians on this situation, if I was a British, say, prime minister, God forbid that the Russians fire on a British sailing ship that was conducting absolutely no provocative actions. That Russian ship is going to be at the bottom of the sea. Be damned. If they want to do something like that against a nuclear-armed country and its citizens, well, have at it. They can blow away the Grigorovich, and if the Russians have a problem with that, well, then there can be a war. But they're not going to go around terrorizing the citizens of a home country. Like, if I was a Britain, they're not going to go around terrorizing the citizens of my home country because they want to act like they have a right to. Their sailors have a right at that point to be at the bottom of the sea along with their ship. How I would deal with it if I was the British Prime Minister, to give you all the full details, I would make sure that that ship is sunk in the English Channel, the crew would be collected from the waters, and then we would hold them on trial as a significant embarrassment to the Russian Federation on any charges that we can come up with. We'll basically make it a show trial, and then we will hold them as prisoners and ransom them back to the Russians when we get terms that are acceptable. That's what I would do.
Oh yeah, 100%. And you know, in reality, what the Russians would do in that situation, if Britain did that bold step, a lot of people were like, "Oh, well, Russia's going to fire nukes at Britain." No, they're not. What would happen is the Russians would say, "Oh, look, the guy on that ship, the commander of the boat or the warship that we sent out, he was simply acting reckless, and we had no part in that. We don't know what the hell he was doing." And they would try to distance themselves from it because Britain has nukes, Russia has nukes. Is Russia ready to throw in the towel as their entire country over one boat doing something stupid? I would probably say probably not. So Britain could call their bluff eventually. And also, by the way, even if it's not a bluff, I mean, what is Britain going to do? Just let the Russians like stomp all over them? It's like, how much more are they going to take? It's like, what are they going to accept the Russians firing on their territory next? There's got to be a line somewhere, and so far England's not drawing that line yet. That was a weak move, by the way, yesterday. Like with the boarding of that ship, with the whole like film crew they brought on board and stuff like that. That came across not very good. Like they made too much of a production out of it. So they could have called their bluff, but clearly I think Putin called Britain's bluff this time. They're once again looking weak.
Yeah, it looks incredibly weak, and I saw someone say, well, wouldn't the U.S. Navy fire warning shots if a ship got too close? From what we have been told, the ship did not get anywhere close to the Russian warship, anywhere to where it was in threatening range. The Russians fired on it from miles away just to fire on it and terrorize the people on board and to send a message to the British because it was a British flagged and owned vessel. That was the only reason that it was done. And because of that stupid reason, there ought to be no safeguards for a Russian ship that close to Britain. The ship should be blown out of the water. I think that would send a message, because you know something, folks. A lot of people go, "Ooh, that's so scary. Maybe we shouldn't do something like that." I'll tell you all a country that did something like that and how it turned out. Turkey did that back in 2016. The Russians, in their idiocy, decided to fly a couple of Su-24s over the southern end of Turkey through basically from Iran through Iraq to be able to try and get to Syria to go and bomb some innocent Syrians. So what the Turks did is that they just shot both of them down within days of each other. And you know what happened? Nothing. The Russians completely backed off. They issued an official apology to Turkey that those aircraft even went through their airspace, and they never did it again. Because here's the thing, folks. If the Russians want to die on a hill of trying to terrorize the British, well, they can actually die there. The British are nuclear armed. Like, whether people like Britain or not these days, Britain has 400 nuclear weapons. That would level the entirety of Western Russia and the rest of everything else in the east and Siberia. The Russians might be able to nuke Britain back, but is Russia willing to die because they tried to pull a stupid terrorization of a small sailboat? No.
No, the Russians wouldn't do that in the first place if they knew that Britain was actually going to respond to it. They wouldn't. The problem is, the reason why Russia keeps doing this is because they know that Britain is not going to respond. So, well, essentially, Britain is causing their own problem at this point. They are their worst enemy. That's the case right now. That's why you can't be weak as a country like that, because the world, like I've made this reference before, but the world in geopolitics operates like a prison mentality. If you're perceived as weak, pretty much every prisoner in the prison is going to get you if you're perceived as weak. So right now, the UK is like the wimp in the corner who's not willing to fight for themselves, and all the other prisoners are looking at them like a snack, basically. So that's what the UK looks like, a big snack.
Also, I saw Mr. Holland say Putin doesn't care. Well, it doesn't matter if he cares. Like I know what you're saying there. He doesn't care, so you might just escalate it into a war. Well, that doesn't matter. Like the principle of it is that we're not going to let. If I was a Briton, I'm an American, speaking from an American position and putting myself in the shoes of the British. If this was a U.S. situation, if I was a British citizen, I wouldn't stand for this. I wouldn't stand for this as an American. I would go to war with the Russians over this. Because there has to be a line that's understood. We're not going to let the Russians just show up, say, in like Maine with a little military group like a battalion and just start going around massacring cities in Maine because we go, oh, well, like Putin could fire back. Well, that's a stupid mindset to take. If the Russians show up in Maine, they're not going to be alive much longer. That's just the premise we have to take for a national defense standpoint. If the Russians have a problem with that, well, then we're at war. We don't really have a choice in that situation, but we're not going to let American lives be at risk or British lives be at risk because we're kind of scared of getting into a larger confrontation when we have no choice at that point.
Man, I'll tell you what, the British need to be the snack that fires back. They need to be that. I'll tell you. Man, I'll tell you what, Brit snacks, the snack that fires back. But they need that, really. That's what they need at this point.
And you know what would happen, folks, is that if the ship was hit and sunk and the crew was ransomed and embarrassed, the Russians would make a little bit of a stink about it diplomatically, but behind the scenes, they would be going to the British going, hey, look, let's try and de-escalate this whole thing, okay? Maybe you could ransom those guys back to us, and we can give you some of the British prisoners that we've captured from like the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. How's that sound? And that's what they would be doing, because everyone wants to talk about the British these days and their domestic internal issues. They still have thermonuclear warheads on Trafalgar-class submarines at sea that can hit Russia in minutes. That never goes away. No matter how much you like the British or hate them, they're a nuclear-armed country with quite a lot of nukes. Like, if you put Britain and France together, they have as much nuclear weapons as the Chinese do right now. So if you put that into mind, they're not going to mess around with the British if they actually show some teeth. If you show some teeth, the British are going to back off. Well, actually, the Russians are going to back off. Right now, it's the other way around. If the Russians show some teeth, the British are going to back off quite literally until the fight's on their beaches, and they would still back off to London probably at this point, sadly. But anyways, moving us on from this whole side note here, and moving us on into the Middle East, there has been a lot.
Yes, it's time for that segment of the night.
Man, the way you just did that, I was like, I dread this segment. Like, I absolutely hate this segment. We've got to get y'all through the bad news first because it's important we get through that because it kind of lays the scene for everything that can happen later, more closer to the show. So, strap in, folks. I'm not going to get incredibly heavy into my thoughts and opinions. I think a lot of y'all are probably going to have the same thoughts and opinions as myself. So, I'm just going to tell y'all what happened today, explain it as we have it, and then we're just going to move on. So, moving us into the diplomatic news that we have for the day, we have been able to hear the following information. U.S. officials have confirmed, according to the Wall Street Journal, in a briefing that Iran will get full access to a total of $100 billion in frozen funds and the $300 billion reconstruction fund, both included in the deal with implementation now underway. More than $150 billion of the fund has already been committed, directly contradicting the president's claims that the U.S. will not contribute to the $300 billion fund, per Reuters. So, from both the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, we are understanding that the U.S. is involved in forking over money to the Iranians. We've also been able to hear some further information as well that apparently the current memorandum of understanding requires for the IRGC to be removed from the terrorist organizations list in the United States of America. There's a problem with that. Currently, the standing law in the books actually effectively blocks the removal of the IRGC from the forest terrorist organization list for the next 4 years because of attacks that they conducted prior. The president can waive the restrictions on the national security grounds, but convincing those in the Congress to support removing the IRGC from the terrorist list will probably be a major political challenge. Also, it appears that Matthew is issuing a correction. What do we have?
Okay, so Reuters, by the way, Reuters did not report that any government was handing over money. By the way, I just want to clarify that Reuters did not report that. I think the person who made that Twitter post was mistaken when they wrote that. What Reuters has reported is that the new fund is a private investment vehicle. It's not a reparations program, and it'll not include any government money or grants. So they're saying it's coming from different regions across the Middle East, etc. It's not entirely clear where the money's coming from. So there's still some stuff that's unknown with it. But it is a $300 billion reconstruction fund. That's what we do know. We just don't know exactly where the money's coming from in the deal. Just to make that correction.
All right, so with that correction out of the way, we also were able to hear that, according to some other sources, we were able to hear that there was a $300 billion Iran investment fund, further corroboration of that across the board, and we've also been able to see a couple of other corroborations of that as well. So we're generally understanding that the United States is pioneering or championing some sort of a $300 billion reinvestment fund for the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we're giving the Islamic Republic of Iran, through some sense or another, from some money somewhere, $300 billion to end the war, basically. It's either coming from the United States or it's coming from other people in the region. We've also been able to hear, additionally, that in the midst of that, later on today, reports of explosions started to come out from South Kisham Island in the Strait. And according to Emegred News, way early on in the day, mind you all, the blast may be linked to maritime traffic management operations. And that was all that was stated. It then came out a little bit later on today that it appears that Iran has fired multiple drones towards commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz since the U.S. and Iran agreed to a memorandum of understanding Sunday. The IRGC has fired multiple drones each night since the MOU was digitally signed Sunday, according to a U.S. official that spoke to NBC News. So it now appears that at the moment, the Islamic Republic Revolutionary Guard Corps is continuing to fire into the Strait of Hormuz and is continuing to attack commercial ships that are even within the remote area, even after the Memorandum of Understanding has been signed. And now we're starting to understand that, according to claims today, there's going to be a $300 billion reinvestment fund, or however it's called, being given to the Iranians. To tell y'all in short what the $300 billion reinvestment fund is, in plain language, historically, that would be called war reparations, which is where a defeated party gives monetary payments to the victor to be able to end the war and basically pay tribute to them in a military defeat. Now, whether or not that money is coming from the United States or from Middle East allies, giving any kind of significant sums of money to a active belligerent in the conflict on the opposite side usually, if not always, historically concedes defeat, as the victorious party in war never pays the other side for losing. That just never happens. You want examples? I'll give you examples. At the end of World War I, in the Treaty of Versailles, the victorious parties of the war, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States of America, did not give Germany any money. In the Treaty of Versailles, it was demanded that the Germans pay war reparations by the billions of Reichsmarks back to France, Britain, and the United States of America, but most importantly to Britain and France. At the end of the Second World War, the Germans were once again required to pay war reparations for the damages that were conducted to the British, the French, and elsewhere throughout the entirety of the conflict. Later on, in the late 40s, because of the possibility of the rise of communism in the region, the Marshall Plan was brought forward, which wasn't war reparations, but was a building up of the now Allied-aligned West German government in support of U.S. interests. If you also look at some other examples throughout history, you would also see that at the end of the American Civil War, for another example, there were absolutely no war reparations paid by the Union to the now defeated Confederacy of the United States. That never happened. You don't see countries that win wars finding ways to give the other side tons of money as a part of the settlement structure at the end of a war. So, to tell y'all in short language, after I've gotten done explaining all of that, you can look at the reinvestment fund, no matter where the money is coming from, as war reparations to Iran, which largely is admitting defeat on the U.S.'s end. And it looks like a lot of people in the chat right now are talking about this in their opinion. And Matthew, what are people saying about that right now, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so right now we do want to emphasize this as well, by the way. The U.S. government is refusing to release the details of this memorandum of understanding. They're refusing to release it. And also, there's reports out there that the U.S. won't even release the details of the deal to Israel, which is literally our partner in the region in the Middle East. So not only is Israel not getting to see it, but also the U.S. public's not getting to see it. And also, not even the U.S. Senate is getting to see it. They said today that they haven't been briefed on what the details are about the plan. So literally nobody knows what's in there except for the U.S. executive branch, and that's it. That's the only people that know what's in this deal. And also, obviously, the Iranians and maybe some of the Gulf states know what's in it, but that's it. They're keeping it very secret, and that's not a good sign, in my opinion. But some people are calling this deal, so far, the leaks that have come out about it, because the leaks don't sound very good. They're calling it a complete surrender by U.S. officials to Iran just to end the war and get it over with. And do you agree with that? 62% said yes, it's a practical U.S. surrender, while 24% said, the deal likely won't work anyway and it probably won't matter at all. 9% said no, it's better than simply endless war. So I would say this, folks. There's no other way to put this. I hate to say it, as an American, it pains me so badly to even say this because I don't want to report this type of news about our country, but if it's what's happening, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's not. I'm not somebody to ignore reality. It's a practical U.S. complete surrender. That's essentially what this is right here. The U.S. has simply lost interest, the U.S. government, that is, specifically the executive branch, has simply lost interest in seeing this thing through. And instead of seeing it through, they're going to sell everybody out. And they're going to sell out the entire U.S. public. They're going to sell out the Middle East partners. They're going to sell out everybody just because they got bored with the war. That is insanity, to say the least. Also, by the way, in my opinion, speaking about the reconstruction fund, the $300 billion reconstruction fund that the U.S. has so far generally said is true, but they're not really saying where the money's coming from. My guess is about half of that, about $120 billion of that Iran reconstruction fund, is going to be coming from all the assets that the West has frozen of the Iranian assets globally. So that's about $120 billion of frozen assets they're probably going to unfreeze to give right back to Iran. That's a hell of a lot of money, by the way, for allegedly reconstruction. Basically, to me, it sounds like reparations. That's what it sounds like to me. Not only that, but Iran's maintaining control of the Strait of Hormuz. They're still firing on vessels literally today, and the U.S. has lifted their blockade already from the sounds of it. So, I mean, how can we frame this in any other way other than a complete surrender? I mean, I don't know how we can really. So this might be one of the first times ever that the U.S. has ever surrendered in a way this aggressively and this badly. It might be one of the first times we've ever done it, and it's completely unnecessary, by the way, completely unnecessary to do this. But for whatever reason, they have. So I'm with a 60%. And Enforcer, what say you?
I would be with a 60%, sadly. And I gotta say, folks, that this is something that pisses me off, and I'm trying to keep it as very calm as I can on air. Pisses me off to the extreme that a country like ours has to suffer a defeat because of the mental ineptitudes of the elected officials in this country. There's no other way to put it than that. If you don't like that, then you're way too lost to be on the show. You need to go find someone else to watch. But this is getting absolutely embarrassing and ridiculous. The United States started the conflict with three important war goals. We were going to overthrow the Iranian regime, we were going to stop their nuclear programs, and we were going to stop their funding of terrorist forces in the region. Now we're looking to delist the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization, which is going the complete opposite of our original war goal. The Islamic regime has not been overthrown in the Islamic Republic of Iran, meaning that we have not achieved that war goal, and the Iranians are going to continue to work on a nuclear weapon. They continue to do that through the JCPOA. They've been doing that for decades prior. They will continue to do that for years or decades after this. There is absolutely no reason to believe that they won't, because it is a terrorist state and they're not to be believed at their word. So all three of the war goals that we originally went into were either completely giving up on them, or we're going in a complete 180 and giving them exactly what they wanted. Not only that, we're now apparently giving de facto control of the Strait of Hormuz from other reports to the Islamic Republic of Iran, which now means that the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was operated as a neutral international waterway before the war, has now been lost and handed over to the Iranians, according to what we're hearing from leaks from the press right now. So not only did we fail at all three of our original war goals on the Islamic Republic of Iran, we even lost something that we had by default at the beginning of the war. That is bullshit. Like, there's no other way to put that. That is a complete surrender. And wherever
Yeah.
this money is coming from, the 300 billion, that is literally paying them war reparations for losing the war. It's a complete defeat. This
Yeah.
is something that the United States should not have to tolerate.
It's so bad. Like it's really like there's no other way to put it. I'll be honest, folks. I've seen only like maybe a handful of people that generally are like YouTubers, people in mainstream media. I've only seen like a handful of people defending those. There's pretty much nobody that can really even defend it for a large part, because like the enforcer was just saying, zero war objectives have been achieved here. Zero. Not only that, but now we've, like you said, gave up control of the Strait of Hormuz from the sounds of it, and now we're giving money back to the Iranians either through unfreezing assets that have been frozen globally by Iranians, or I mean, we're apparently giving them money from the sounds of it. So we're way worse off than we were before this war started. Much, much worse off. And now we're about $100 billion in the hole from military spending on this war. That's another downside to it. And not only that, but Iran is now emboldened to go even further and do whatever the hell they want at this point. I mean, what is holding Iran back from doing anything at this point? There's nothing, because they basically just forced the U.S. to surrender. And we didn't have to. That's the part that really gets me angry. We did not have to surrender to Iran. This is a completely voluntary decision by the leadership here in the United States. Completely voluntary. We could have finished the job. It might have gotten nasty, but we could have finished it, which would have been much better off than simply looking extremely weak like this. So, it's just a pure shame.
To put it in another way, folks, at the rate of spending that we had for a month and a half of the war, which was $100 billion, we would have continued this war on for another 4.5 months at the cost of $300 billion. Instead of giving it to Iran, we could have used it to win the war. No matter where the money's coming from. And I want to make that clear. At the moment, we don't really know exactly where the money's coming from. We're kind of hearing that it's not from the United States, but I want to bring up something. I'm not trying to get domestically political here, but I've got to bring up something that was heavily lied about and leads me to believe that there was going to be a lot of money coming from the United States. Do y'all remember the whole thing about the ballroom for the White House that was brought up a little while ago? Like, about how it was all going to be funded by private donors and it wasn't going to cost the taxpayer a cent, and it was only going to cost $200 million, and it wouldn't, no one in the U.S. taxpayer base would have to pay for it. Well, now the ballroom is expected to cost $600 million, and most of that money is actually going to be appropriated through a congressional spending bill that will be provided for by taxpayer dollars. And at the very beginning, it was sworn up and down and promised that not a single tax dollar, not a single cent, would be spent by the U.S. taxpayer to build that beautiful big ballroom. And now the U.S. taxpayer is paying way more than the private donors ever would have paid to build the damn thing. So, considering the fact, just to say here, because we have a little bit of a track record at this point of flat-out lies about what the U.S. is spending money on and what they're not, I'm heavily doubting that the U.S. isn't spending a single cent on this whole reparations thing to Iran. I'm having a feeling that when we actually get the deal out, which then it'll be too late because they're deliberately concealing at this point to hide it from the public for open discussion and open disgust at what we're actually doing, I have a feeling that once the memorandum of understanding is lapsed and the peace deal is signed and in stone, we're probably going to find out here in the United States that we're going to get absolutely flossed, and probably a decent amount of that money is going to be paid out by the United States of America directly from the taxpayer. That's what I'm generally expecting at this point.
And also, by the way, here's another problem right here. There's a law out there that says that Iran cannot be taken off the sanctions list for like a minimum of 4 years, and I can't remember. I think that law was signed into effect. I think it was like a year or two ago. So technically, Iran cannot be unsanctioned, which is allegedly part of the peace deal that's been signed, the memorandum of understanding. They can't be taken off the sanctions list by law at this point. So that's not even legally permissible to a large degree. Also, not to mention that legal issue, but then to move on to another one, this memorandum of understanding, as they're calling it, is essentially a treaty. So in order for a treaty to become, permanent, it has to be ratified in the Senate. And so far, there is no plans I've seen stated by anybody anywhere that they plan on sending this to the Senate to ratify it. So I'm not sure what's up with that. I even heard the senator come out today, who's in the party of the president, saying that they don't even know what's in it. They've not been briefed about what's in this deal right now, which is a major breach of constitutional duties, by the way. So I mean, there's a lot of problems here, like legally speaking, even outside of the practical issues that Iran probably won't follow through with any of this stuff. Legally, it's shaky.
It is incredibly shaky and wildly shaky. And I saw someone say in the chat, and I don't mean to sound sarcastic addressing this, but if I do sound like it, it's not at the question, it's more so at the idea. But someone said, well, the war was unwinnable because, once we got into the war, the US would basically have to fight it to its conclusion, which might lead to a lot of losses of men. Well, you can't claim to be the big daddy on the block and start a war if you're not willing to finish it. And sadly, when you get into a war that might be a little bit over your head, that comes with the understanding that a lot of people's lives could be lost fighting that war. I hate to say it that way, but that's just the reality of how wars are fought. And you can't sit there and get into a war and then go, ooh, the pool's too cold for me. Like, I don't like it. My feet are shivering. I'm going to have to run away. That's not how wars work. When you start a war, you have to fight it to the finish. At that point, it's to the nail, to the tooth, blood and bone until the end. There's no such thing as getting into a war and going, oh, this looks like I got in over my head. I'm just going to surrender and walk off. You don't do that. That has humongous consequences for the country for the rest of its national history. So those sorts of decisions, you really aren't in the wheelhouse to make as the president. You are in the wheelhouse to do this. I'm going to start the war, and we're going to have to win it at no matter the cost. Like, that's just the end result. There's no such thing as you just, because you lose interest in it, you quit and you walk away and you just surrender like this is. You just can't do that. So I hope that addresses that well. But this right here is one of the worst blistering defeats I've ever seen. Not only that, it's not even one that just happened. It's one that we basically artificially constructed from start to finish at this point. And in the meantime, we're also hearing that the Israelis asked to see it, and the U.S. isn't even willing to let the Israelis see it, which the United States claims is one of our biggest allies. So from what we're understanding, whatever's in this thing must be abhorrent, because nobody in the world is allowed to see what's actually in the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran. And if it's the greatest, most beautiful Memorandum of Understanding, why in the world will the president not allow our poor, peasantly-looking eyes, our weary little eyes, to look on the thing and read it and see what it actually says if it's so good? I mean, if it was so good, we might look at it, and the world might look like it's covered in rainbows and roses, Why in the world is it being hidden? It's because it's not good. And that's just the fact of it. If it was good looking, they just let everyone read it. We also were able to hear that the Iranians are now threatening the Israelis as well, now seeing that the Israelis are largely isolated. And the Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya headquarters claimed that Israel has violated the southern Lebanon ceasefire 84 times in 2 days since the president declared the war is over. The command warned that if Israel's strikes continue, Iran's armed forces will respond harshly, already showing that the Iranians plan on resuming the war with Israel solo, considering there probably won't be any more support for Israel in the entirety of the region. We have also been able to hear that in the midst of this all, ISIS decided to get a lick in today and actually attacked an Iraqi government oil tanker passing through the Manbij city area in Syria over the day, with this statement here coming out from ISIS directly, saying that they took responsibility for the attack around Manbij, showing that ISIS is also starting to rear its head up a little bit farther and is trying to exert more influence over the central Syrian area from Palmyra all the way up to the Lake Assad region just to the east of Aleppo. So it certainly appears that they might be resurging in large form here again at some point in the future, because their influence and spread of attacks are beginning to grow within the Middle East. But outside of that, a lot of people are talking about the current situation with the IRGC threat by the Qatam al-Anbiya against the Israelis today, that if they do not retreat from southern Syria, they will attack the Israelis harshly as a response. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so right now we're hearing that in the midst of the peace deal being signed between the United States and Iran, that largely, I think for the most part, it excluded Israel from the talks, but yet Israel somehow included in this memorandum of understanding. Kind of weird, by the way, because you can't bind a party that's not a member of the talks to something they don't even agree to. So that's a little bit weird on its face. But now the Iranian IRGC is threatening to attack Israel harshly if it doesn't leave Lebanon. So what are your thoughts about that? 49% said Israel will be left alone to fight Iran once this starts up again. 37% said Israel will still get U.S. defenses, and 6% said Iran won't attack Israel now because of that peace deal that's being signed. And I would say that, unfortunately, I think Israel might be on the verge of getting left alone, because I'm already detecting a bit of a narrative shift from the executive branch here in the United States. They're already starting to make it sound like Israel's being ridiculous by being in southern Lebanon and trying to get rid of Hezbollah. They're already making it sound like that. So I'm detecting a bit of a narrative shift, to say the least. I'm kind of surprised by that too, because there's a lot of influence that generally, pulls strings in politics here in America, and I'm kind of shocked by this change to a certain degree. So I think Israel might be left alone. And also, by the way, if they are, and the U.S. adheres to this so-called MOU that generally says the U.S. must stay out of the hostilities, that means we're giving Iran open season on Israel to a large degree. So I mean, at that point, the U.S. is forced back into, are we going to violate the MOU and help defend Israel, or are we going to just stand back and let Israel keep getting attacked over and over and let that be the end of it? So that's why this is very tricky. Obviously, Iran doesn't want peace, and they haven't surrendered. The Iranians definitely haven't surrendered, because why are they threatening to attack Israel with missiles again? So, Enforcer, what say you?
I think Israel's probably going to be left alone out to the cleaners, because that's how the U.S. has been doing everyone in every region over the past year and a half at this point, and I would expect that the Israelis are going to be the next one on the chopping block. We did that to Ukraine, we did that to the whole of Europe, we did that to the South American nations, we did that to East Asia just recently with our visit to China. We've done this with everybody, and now it's Israel's turn to be treated like trash and basically just thrown to the wayside at this point. So whether or not, folks, you say that Israel is a decent ally or not, and I would say there's a good argument there to say that they're not really the best ally. I would say that at the same time, however, leaving allies out to dry and just packing up and walking off in every region and making a running trend of that is not doing the U.S. any good for its image. It makes it look like we're not an ally to stick by, and it'd be better for them to pack up and change allegiances. The Israelis say right now they're kind of friendly with the Russians a little. What if they start leaning a little bit further that way? Who's to say? That could start to happen. Or what in the world would happen if the whole of the Middle East starts moving over to China? It's not going to be a good move for us. But with that, we are going to move on out of this news because as if ever move on to the Ukraine news. Honestly, I could agree. I got to tell you, folks, you all can see me right now. I probably look like one of those cartoon characters that's like red in the face, and their face is like almost about to explode, and there's like steam coming out of their ears. That's how I feel on this whole thing. So moving us on out of that and on into some better news that we've been able to hear. It's time for us to move on up and into Ukraine and to round out the rest of the Ukraine war news that we have for the day. Unfortunately, we are going to have to start off on a bit of a sad note, as we did get to hear the Ukrainian pilot did die today in the crash of an aircraft near to the area Khmelnytsky within the western regions of Ukraine as the aircraft crashed, and unfortunately the pilot was not able to eject. We're not entirely sure at the moment whether it was a MiG-29 or a Su-25, but we're still trying to find out that information at the moment. The armed forces, the Air Force of Ukraine did put out a statement, however, stating the death of the pilot and also the aircraft that was lost. It was just that, unfortunately, I didn't put that here on air to be able to recite. But moving us on from that, we also were able to hear that within Ukraine, the defense minister, Fedorov, is starting to say more positive words about the development of Ukrainian long-range attack forces. As Ukrainian ballistics soon, and it will strike at Russia. The emergence of Ukrainian ballistics will change Ukraine's status in the world, according to the defense minister, Fedorov. So it appears that Fedorov is apparently eyeing some sort of significant advances in Ukrainian drone and ballistic missile technology that will start to elevate the Ukrainians into a regional power just by their military capabilities alone. And I was actually talking to Matthew before the show about this. I would have to say, folks, I think that it's probably inevitable at this point that at the end of the war, Ukraine is definitely going to be a regional power by military force alone. Before the war, they were a minor power is probably the best way to explain them, which is probably one of the lowest levels that you can give for a country. They had a military, but they really didn't have any power projection capabilities, hardly at all. Even beyond their own borders, they really were just entirely a defense force. Now, in the present day, they are a regional power. They can exert influence and conduct attacks 1,200 miles from their territory. I mean, if you drew a map from Ukraine's western border all the way across Europe, they have the ability to extend power all the way to Wales in the western side of the United Kingdom right now, and all the way up to Scotland, literally almost to Ireland. And in the opposite direction, they have the ability to extend, well, actually in the southern direction to show that, they have the ability to extend, if they retake Crimea, power projection all the way down into the northern Red Sea. When you put it like that, most countries do not have that kind of a capability, even in NATO for that reason. Most countries do not have that sort of a military capability. Yet Ukraine has developed that almost entirely internally at this point, and not only that, they're saying that there are going to be even grander innovations and technologies coming out here within the near future. And based off of the current Ukrainian track record of producing unbelievable missile and drone systems, there's really no reason to doubt that they're slowing down. If anything, we believe they're probably speeding up with the kind of technical expertise and knowledge that they're building up inside of their country. We've also been able
What,
to
what
see.
if you what if Ukraine ends up becoming the de facto leader of NATO? If the U.S. keeps trying to bow out of NATO to a large degree, it's like I know Ukraine's not a member of it yet, but I mean, when Ukraine wins the war and the war is over, they can enter NATO at that point. So I mean, at that point, Ukraine might be one of the most powerful members of NATO when they join, if they keep up this current rate of advancement with their weapons technology and also their arsenal as a whole. Granted, Ukraine doesn't have nukes. But I would argue that nukes aren't really that important of an operational capability when you're fighting a ground war like this. It's more important to have operational weapons that actually work on a front line because you can't lob nukes at each other when you're fighting a normal war. That's mainly for deterrence. So, me personally, Ukraine could be a viable contender for leading the European sphere of NATO.
I would say they'd definitely be up there. Like if the U.S. left NATO, which at this point, honestly, folks, I don't know if that would do any harm to them. It probably would be beneficial to them, actually. But if we saw that the United States did leave NATO, I think that they would form something of a council of a sort, where the French, the British, the Germans, the Polish, and the Ukrainians would be the main decision makers in the alliance for strategic and military purposes. Because Germany has the economic might, along with France and Britain. Poland and Ukraine, Germany, France, and Britain have the largest militaries in all of NATO, and the ones that would be the most capable technologically. And I would say that they probably just form like maybe a 5-group council with one executive head like nation, or maybe revolve it year to year between different executive head nations. I have a feeling though that the Ukrainians would probably be vying with the French at that point for some sort of a top position in NATO leadership.
Yeah, maybe so. It could be possible. Ukraine just could end up taking over Europe, possibly.
It's time to it's time to realize the Ukrainian dream. Go take Poland.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Ukraine could end up taking over Russia for it's over with. You never know. Before this war ends up getting defeated on the Russian side, Zelensky could be the president of Russia and Ukraine for it's over with.
Man, right now at the G7 summit, Zelensky, it's so good to see you. I'm about to start steamrolling you again. I'm building a nuclear weapon. Oh, why didn't you say so? Here's $400 billion. I hope you have a great time, Zelensky. I've always loved you. I've always loved you. Regime change in Ukraine? Well, it happened when Zelensky got in charge. Really the greatest guy. We all love him. But moving us on out of that news in Ukraine, the statements from the Ministry of Defense, we also got to see that in the area of the Kursk Oblast, the Ukrainians did a little funny one today. They actually blew up a Russian training ground in Bullshit Ugany. A lot of y'all are probably like, where the hell is Bullshit Ugany? And what kind of stupid name is that? It is stupid. Here is Bullshit Ugly. And I actually don't know where the training grounds were relative to the town, but they were somewhere around this town. Here's the clip of them blowing it up, though, which is really the icing on the cake. There they are. Okay, everybody, we learned two group, Liat. Two group. And then they blow up the training ground.
Damn, these Russians right here only got 1 week of training.
Man, they kind of got thrown from the frying pan and into the fire, like literally. Man, they said, okay, here's how to train how to avoid drones. Now here's the live example. And then the Ukrainian drones just started coming in and clearing them out.
Oh, Bliat, this is becoming a very tricky exercise. We're live fire. Bliat, our commanders are putting us through the ringer. They have no idea it's actually the Ukrainians attacking.
Man, they're about to get captured by the Ukrainians. On God, I thought it was a training exercise. Like, those same drones were, like, blowing us up back in Russia. We just thought it was, like, a part of the drills. But moving us on out of that and into our location unknowns, we have some very interesting ones today. First off, we were able to hear that the Ukrainians are developing a brand new DART missile. Apparently, this thing is going to be carried by a balloon to high altitude of about 12 to 18 kilometers and then gravity dropped towards its target. Once the missile gets some sort of an image of the target that it's going for, it will use a very similar computational system to the AGM-65 Maverick, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly, and it will then make its way onto the target itself striking it and destroying it. It'll be carrying a warhead of about 3.5 to 10 kilograms, and considering that it's coming in from above, almost at a direct 90-degree angle, the armor there would be minimal, the explosive force would have to be minor, and it would be able to cause a significant amount of damage. So we'll have to see how well that thing performs, but it's a very interesting concept. That's also what it'll look like deployed on the balloon. Kind of crazy to look at, but moving us on out of that whole deal, we've also been able to see the Ukrainians cooking up some fresh Contact 1 ERA. Many people have been wondering where the Ukrainians have been getting this limited supply of Contact 1 ERA throughout the whole war. And crazily enough, I didn't know this either until today. They're making the stuff. It's simple enough to make, and I didn't realize that until today, until I started thinking, oh yeah, this stuff was made in like the early 70s, so it has to be pretty easy to make. But they just go and literally stamp explosive filler into them, stamp out the sheets, and just make them in the thousands and put them on whatever they want. They work pretty decently too, so, you know, a pretty reliable sort of an explosive reactive armor to have. We also were able to see the Ukrainians training some folks on some UGVs in the 2nd Khartia Corps. Take a look at this training montage. And we'll have to mute that, but we see...
Oh man, they put in some of that clown music with it. That is insane, man. They got a whole army of these things. It almost looks like the infantry, really. These robots.
Yeah, it kind of does. It's also just wild to watch it, man. These things have 50 caliber machine guns on them.
Can you imagine if they draped the entire thing and somehow like prevented the like ghillie suit from getting caught up in the wheels? Like if they put like a legit like super realistic ghillie suit over the entire thing, that would be immense. Literally a moving bush.
Man, that would be insane. Oh, it's just wild to watch this these days and to think that this is a firepower multiplier for most Ukrainian platoons these days. Like, they'll send one of these up with the infantry to give them a whole unmanned flank of supporting fire to be able to cover their advance if they conduct infantry battles. These things can even be operated entirely without infantry, basically as a standalone one-man army.
Are they electric or are they gasoline powered?
Not really sure on that one. I think they're probably gas powered for reliability's sake.
Yeah, I was about to say if they're electric, I'm not really sure if it'd create that big of a heat signature. I know that the electric motors, they would create heat. There's always some friction with a motor, no matter what type of motor it is and how it's powered. But it would greatly reduce the heat signature on it to a large degree. But if it's gasoline powered, it's going to have a pretty large signature.
Yeah, I think so, but generally it'll be fine because they produce these things now in like the hundreds per month. So whatever losses they're taking, they're probably building more of them than they're losing, hopefully. We also got to see the Russian casualty report for the day as well, and holy moly!
Oh, wow. They got 4 more Bobcats to round it up to a 4,300 number. I'd like to see that.
A nice round number. And according to Miss Decent, keeper of the records, 7 air defense systems tied for the 3rd highest of the war. A daily loss not seen since late 2024, 2 years ago. 417 supply trucks and fuel tanks is the 6th highest loss, and June-to-date averages exceed prior 2026 months in all categories. And over the course of the past 24 hours, we have been able to see that 1,230 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed, along with 5 APCs, 417 supply trucks, 1 main battle tank, 36 artillery pieces, 2,062 drones, 2 MLRSs, 5 cruise missiles, 7 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and 4 Bobcat skid steers. All in all, an amazing day, and of course showing us that the Ukrainians are still laying it heavy onto the Russian armed forces. Meanwhile, within the areas of the front lines near to Kupiansk, Russian forces were continuing to be hit by the 33rd Mechanized Brigade, which were clearing out Russian forces like some people clear out addicts for yard sales. Take a look at this. They found Russian storage sheds filled with a boundless supply of buhankas.
That's not a good place to store those right there in an open shed. Oh my, it's like a dealership. The Ukrainians have their pick of the finest model of buhanka.
I will blow this piece of shit away. I like this one.
Also, by the way, how old are these considered new or are these old?
Why, this would be considered the newest vintage.
The newest vintage, I guess you could say. Well, how come there's no Russians anywhere around this?
Boy, it's the multiple. They just drop them off there and then they wander off to some building elsewhere.
Well, damn, that was a bad day to wander off. It looks like the fox is in the hen house. It looks like
they got some fire in the kitchen. I think because that thing is burning now pretty badly. There goes another one. We see the exterior view. That fire's starting to rip down that building pretty fast, like. moving us on from those clips of the 33rd Mechanized Brigade, we also got some more clips coming out of the area of Severodonetsk that the Ukrainians are now hitting and destroying supply trucks even as far back as Severodonetsk in the northern regions of Luhansk. You see the skull here getting a crack out of it. Why do y'all laugh at war? Because our Ukrainian friends laugh at war. That's why. But we can see them here blowing up this buhanki. Oh, guess you could say that that wasn't a good buhanka. Well, that's the end of that clip. Kind of a simple one.
Their intro and outro took up more video than the actual clip of the buhanki. Honestly, that's crazy.
well, moving on from that, the 81st Brigade also knocked out a Russian assault on the town of Seversk today, a legitimate column assault, which is actually somewhat rare to see on film for even the Ukrainian armed forces to catch these days. We were able to see the Russians here making their way in their little columns through the open fields from Seversk, farther west, attempting to punch their way out towards Kramatorsk, further on to the west. But the Ukrainians are going to stop these intentions very quickly.
I feel like we got scammed in that last video. I feel like it was like free advertising. They just like barely put like a little small tiny clip right in the middle of it, and then the rest was just all intro and outro.
Man, it was like going to the Enforcer channel and watching that long ass intro they have every single night. What a waste!
Hell, man, our intro is light compared to how long our stream is. Like our stream's like almost 4 hours long these days, and that intro is what, like 12 minutes or something?
8, actually. It's 8 minutes.
Oh, 8 minutes. Yeah, that's barely anything. It's like a fraction of our stream time.
Man, honestly, just such a waste of time, folks. To think that the creators of the show have to get ready and everything for the show during those 8 minutes. They ought to just like get on air unprepared like other people do. Ridiculous, really. But we see them blowing up some dirt bikes.
You know, we ought to really ramp up like our bottom line. We should start putting titles like U.S. defeats Iran unilaterally. Iran cries for help and stuff like that. There's a channel that does it out there. I won't name who it is. I'm sure people know who it is just from me saying that right there. Complete delusional propaganda channel, to say the least. But we don't do that type of stuff, folks. We don't care if we get flack for it or not. We're going to put the reality in the stream and videos. So you can always rely on us for that. Unfortunately, it doesn't do us any favors to do that, but we'd rather be honest.
The Iranians came home from school late and mommy was weeping. Some stupid title like that. Like, that would get in the millions of them.
Yeah, there was even a video title out there that was like, the U.S. just got Iran's nuclear dust, and here's what happened. And it's like, this is complete bullshit. It's like they haven't gone in for the nuclear dust whatsoever. I would, honestly, folks, I am having to fight myself not to name the channel. I'm not going to do it, though, as I don't want to start a beef out of the blue.
I gotta say, folks, it's hard. Like, I actually kind of want to make, like, an expose video on that, because it's like, the amount of misinformation that they're giving, and then people will come here and ask us, is that true? And then other people will come in here, you're a liar, because this other person said this, and it's like, well, they're full of shit. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. Like,
that dude's a real patriot, lying like a dog. It's like, that's not being a patriot. That's called being a propagandist.
Like, man, like, it's like that stuff at the end of World War II. The Soviet army's in Berlin, and the Germans responded. It's like, why are the Soviets in Berlin, though? Like, it's like, maybe we need to be asking the real questions here. Why is that the case? Or the Soviets, for example, a heroic defense was conducted on the outskirts of Moscow, and we're winning this war. It's like, well, in 1941, that doesn't look like winning. You know, it's like they're right at the capital city's gates. You know, not really a good look. But anyways, moving us on from that, we also were able to see in the area of Konstantinivka some Ukrainian badanas from the 28th Brigade lighting up that front.
Oh wow! Look at whoa! Was that motorized or was somebody turning that manually? Do you see that crank handle moving like that?
Oh, that's automatic. Actually, it's there for like manual redundancy, but it actually automatically operates.
Dang, man, I thought they had Popeye on the other side of the thing, like turning that crank handle like a fiend. I was about to say somebody is built on the other side of that thing.
Man, and they are laying down the cluster rounds on top of them.
Call them or don't call them Popeye. It looks like they're putting the Bluto down on this bastard over here. I got that all messed up, but y'all get the point. Y'all understand the spirit behind it.
Man. And then I saw some people say, oh, y'all's titles are clickbait. Our titles aren't clickbait. They're like actually what's happening. They're like exaggerated slightly, but they're actually what's happening. Like we're not saying like the U.S. just won and Mujtaba kissed Trump's feet. Like that would be a flat out lie. Like if we put that in the title, that's just not even true. Saying something else though, like in our title tonight, like massive explosions and Moscow attacks. I mean, if you looked at the refinery video from earlier that we showed, that's a massive explosion in Moscow. Pretty dead on the nail as to what happened on the show. Like, that's not really clickbait. Sounds sensationalist, but we always have the receipts to back up what we write in our titles. Like, always. Like, that's why we're a successful channel, is that everybody knows that they can rely on us, that while our titles sound exciting, there's usually excitement to follow in actual videos that we have. But moving us on from that and into Pokrovsk, we also were able to see Russian forces getting hit within this area as well by the 68th Jaeger Brigade.
Looks like they did a number on the inside of this building right here. It looks like it's in dire need of a new paint. Oh, look at this thing like lurking in the shadows here.
Oh,
look at that.
That's a T-72. Like that. Wow. Well, what do you know?
Smoking the tank or smoking the vehicle. Look at it, and they're getting a nice smoking.
Man, beautiful. But moving us on out of Pokrovsk, we also get to see further on down and in the front, the Ukrainians taking down some drones with a MiG-29. This is actually a rare clip. We rarely ever get to see this. And there goes the R-73. And we get to follow it all the way to impact. Oh, bliad! To pieces? Man.
We would like piss. Piece of the disaster. Look, it's a piece of plane.
Look, we would like to style on them bitches.
Like a long-lasting piss. Long-lasting.
Man. And sadly, folks... Oh, wait a minute. We have one more thing. One more... Oh, actually, we have a couple. Hey, we were able to see that the Luftwaffe unit was able to strike an electronic warfare unit in Melitopol City today. A very rare one that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, actually.
What is up with this, like, one type of bot showing up every single night? It's a bot with a Cyrillic name, and they keep, like, creating, like, dozens of different accounts. And they come in here with that same anti-Semitic statement every
about
single
the Soviet
night. Like,
Union for some reason, too.
It's literally the exact... It's clearly the same person with, like, a dozen different accounts every single night. Because I ban them every single night when I see it, and they keep coming back. I see Diane Merriam said, there's that Cyrillic bot yet again. That's wild. Like, whoever that is like, determined to put that anti-Semitic garbage out, like, every single night.
Man, they always come in here, the Jewish people in the Soviet Union. It's like, that's like, just like schizo talk. Like, literally, like, it's like, this person's like straight up off their meds and making an our problem nightly. Like, they know they need to get some help. But moving us on out of that in Melitopol, we also get to see over in Oleski some fixed wing Ukrainian bombers also taking care of some of the Russians in the area. And this was actually conducted, folks, by none other than the Nationalna Policja Ukraina, which means the National Police of Ukraine. The National Police of Ukraine be, like, carrying some work out here these days.
Man, I'll tell you what, honestly, the most crazy clips we get come from the Ukrainian police. It's like they make the infantry kind of look a little soft compared to what the police are out here doing.
Man, the police would literally go up into a city and be like, he's in there, get him! Like, and they'll, like, charge the building, like, just laying down fire the whole time. It's insane. Like, and the infantry would be like, let's send out a drone. Man, the police would be out there, he's got a gun! Like, it's like, damn, dude, get him! Like, crazy, honestly.
Lesson of the day: if you ever go to Ukraine, definitely don't pick a fight with the police. Like, probably don't do that. Don't try that.
Man, like, dude, if you go to Ukraine, you try that line. Why don't you try and be a real hero for the country? Like, go fight in the war. Man, they like tip up their head. You son of a bitch, I am. Like, man, like that's what I do on the weekends.
Man,
that'd be crazy, like, get pulled over by a cop in Ukraine, and it's like, oh, how's the war going? Yeah, it's going pretty good. Like, I just got off of rotation, and now I'm back here in Khmelnytsky policing the streets. It's like, that's kind of wild when you think about it, that could be the case for some Ukrainian policemen. But moving us on out of that bit of news in Kherson, we also got one more thing to round out the day on, which is a really cool one. This new submersible drone that Ukraine is working on. The Sea Trident. This thing is insane.
Damn. Looks like an underwater nuke. The size of this thing is absurd, really. That's huge. It basically looks like the flamingo body. It's been turned into a submarine.
This thing, I'm about to blow your mind when I tell you the stats on this thing in a second. This is the Sea Trident, which is a heavy underwater drone capable of carrying 2,204 pounds of explosives to strike strategic targets. So it's basically a mini nuke underwater, this thing is, in conventional force. The drone operates with low visibility and can function at a depth up to 60 meters, which is approximately about 120 feet or so. It is capable not only of delivering explosives and cargo, but also of intercepting other underwater drones and executing long-range autonomous missions. So it's basically a giant bomb, and it also is the manta ray from the U.S. Navy.
Also, by the way, how much of a payload does a normal sea mine have on it? You know, like the mines that Iran's putting in the Strait of Hormuz. What's the yield or payload on that?
Like a Maham 3, I think it had like a 300 kilogram explosive.
Holy cow! So this is like the equivalent of almost like 3 of those things in one.
Yeah, this thing is huge.
Oh my god! Like I can if this is going for a ship, like for example, a Russian ship, and this hits it, that might just like take the whole like entire main part of the ship out, like just in one go. Like forget the whole like cracking in half. Like this might just incinerate it.
Man, knowing the Ukrainians, man, they're going to whip one of these out, sail it straight up to the entrance of the Vostochny Rayon, and the first ship to try and leave through this one little entrance, it just blows up right under them, and it sinks the ship right in the entrance. Man, that would be crazy. And it would vaporize most of that ship. Like, the whole midsection, if it blew up around the midships area, would be gone. It would literally just be blown out of the water into pieces, and the bow and the stern would be all that's left, and it would probably sink quickly after that. I would hate to see the damage that thing is going to do.
I'm telling you, man, Ukraine has a navy at this point. I mean, this is their submarine basically right here that they've created. So between the sea babies, that's like their like attack boats or patrol boats, basically, the sea babies are. This is their submarine right here. It's just that they've built an entirely unmanned navy that doesn't require any sailors. All they have to have is people sitting in Connex boxes piloting the thing remotely. And they might not even need that before long. They might just use AI to pilot the thing and let it do it autonomously to a large degree. So, I mean, this is honestly, I would say Ukraine's building the Navy of the future at this point, completely unmanned, but extremely effective.
Man, the one's gonna be talking about, everybody likes the high seas, but we're about to be blowing you up in the high seas. Like, man, we're about to be putting the high in the high seas with how you're gonna be flying after this explosion. Man, think about the water spurt that's gonna come from this thing when it blows up. It's gonna look like a little nuclear bomb went off.
Yeah, really, honestly, I think once one of these things attacks something, I think you'll definitely know it because the explosions are going to be so large, everybody's going to be like, what the hell caused that? It'll probably be this thing.
Man, honestly, folks, I'm excited to see this thing at work at some point when we get the footage of it. It's going to be unbelievable. Like, I'm going to be blown away with what this thing can do, because the Flamingo's already proven that it can literally destroy whole factories with one missile. So I'm really looking forward to what this thing can do, because I bet it can destroy entire ports. Oh my god, imagine if they use this thing on Novorossiysk oil port. It would literally uproot the port facilities off of the bottom of the seabed.
Yeah, that would be insane to say the least. Also, do we know what the range is on that thing? Did you say that?
They didn't list that publicly, sadly, so we don't know. It's definitely long range, though. I mean, look at the size of that thing.
It's Ukraine's really refined their ability to connect weapons like a long range. Like they can generally use satellite and stuff like that to connect it. So, I mean, if this thing has like a practically unlimited range or something close to that, I mean, they could send this thing around the world to hit something, or potentially like, maybe partially halfway around the world to hit something. They've done that with their aerial drones. So I wouldn't imagine it's hard to do with the submarine if they've done it with the aerial. So, I mean, that could be very scary. This thing could go pretty much anywhere.
If they could get these things through the Crimea or the Kerch Bridge defense perimeter and put a couple of them at the key supports of the bridge and blow them up all simultaneously, that would knock out the bridge permanently. Like, the repairs would be so extensive, it would be impossible to repair. So, this thing has a lot of potential. I mean, there's a lot of marine-type targets or targets in marine environments that this thing can hit and destroy. And with that kind of explosive force, it's a guaranteed winner that it's going to be destroying whatever it blows up near to. 2,204 pounds of explosives is going to destroy anything that's right up on it. So we'll have to see what this thing does. But with that in mind, folks, that is actually the end of the news for the day on that bombshell, quite literally, of news that we just got in the Sea Triton drone, which was just unveiled recently. And it's time for us, folks, to move on into the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. Sadly, Zelensky didn't make a speech today. He's currently at the G7 summit, so he didn't have the ability to make one. But hopefully we'll be able to hear from him again quite soon. But we will be moving into the question segment, where we get to talk to a lot of folks and listen to y'all, which are absolutely incredible folks. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping into our super chats, our live chats, and Morse code decoders of the night, let's start off with our first super chat here, which goes to Ella MC Wheels Nafo, who puts in a $100 support, by the way, an extremely generous one, and a huge shout to you, Ella, for that massive support, and also helping to keep the channel running. And Ella said, cheers, Enforcers. I appreciate the news every night, appreciate the laughs, and appreciate everything you both do. And take one from the chat, LLTLSA, and Slava Ukraine.
Hey, and a big thanks to your support, Ella McWheels Nafo. And thank you so much for enjoying the news. And the laughs. We try and give laughs the best we can. Hopefully we did it well tonight. And I hope that we did the news pretty good tonight as well, too. And thank you so much for appreciating everything we both do. We put in a lot of work, the both of us, on our own ends and our own ways to make this show and the whole channel possible every single day. And we love to know that folks greatly appreciate both of us for what we do, because it is the team that makes the dream work, as they say. And we're greatly appreciative of folks like you who enjoy the channel and support it, so we can keep this entire operation running each and every single day, including off days like yesterday, where we took on an amazing adventure. We put a little bit of it on Patreon, and I was there. I saw some people in the comment section say, where's Enforcer? Because I wasn't in any of the pictures or videos. I was left behind because I'm out of shape and I'm quite slow. So I was left behind. Matthew made it way up to the lake before I did, and then I made it up there, and by the time I made it up there, I was dying, and when I was coming back, I was dying. So there are no pictures of me because I was in absolutely horrid shape. I still am, actually. I'm basically in a wheelchair today with how bad all of my legs are. Like, they are shot. Because it was a, what was it, Matthew? 8.2 mile round trip, 2,400 feet of vertical elevation.
It was 8.5 miles round trip on the hike, and we elevated about 2,400 feet to the lake, and it was a pretty high alpine lake. The total altitude that we were at was 10,000 feet, which is extremely high, by the way. That makes the shiver me timbers of some people that live in the southern states, because y'all are at, like, I think it's like 100 feet of elevation above sea level or something like that. So it's like, you know, it's barely anything. But 10,000 feet, that's wild. That's the altitude some planes fly at. Like a Cessna. I think that might be pretty high for a Cessna, actually. But some planes fly at 10,000 feet. So it was wild. Hey, you can actually show to people, like, some of the pictures from the Patreon post, or maybe the video, but at least the pictures if you wanted.
I'm actually going to include some of pictures of my own as well. I'm going to send them in our DMs. I'll show those in a second. Because Matthew took his own pictures, and I took mine on the way up. And because I was going a lot slower, I took a lot more pictures on the way up than up there at the lake. But let me get y'all to the Patreon really quickly and show you this, because it was actually really cool. And also let y'all see a little surprise view of Matthew, because he also made a video up there. So let me get there. Yeah, here we are. Let me get y'all there. Yeah. So
you just play them the video, I guess. The Patreon supporters, by the way, we give them the early access to it. I know some people are like, well, why are you showing the Patreon stuff here? They got to see this yesterday when I put it out, so we can show you all the pictures. And also, I even put my Strava stats on here too, if you are curious about what that looked like to actually go that high up. There it is right there. Is the route. That's how crazy the route was. You can see going from, that's like right below Alta, where that green dot is. That's where we started. And then we went all the way up to the top of there where you see the snow-capped peak. That's how far we went up. That's about 2,400 feet of elevation right there.
His average speed was a whopping 2.2 miles per hour. If y'all want to know my average speed, I think at the end of it, it was 2 miles an hour. But sadly, folks, AllTrails, which is the app I use to track my data, I tried to crop out this weird GPS spoof thing that happened at the top where it threw me over the mountain and back in a minute, and it like heavily skewed the stats. I tried to delete that thing, and it ended up deleting everything but that. So now that's all that's left on the stats for me, sadly. But I had similar, well, I had the same stats in every way as he did for the larger part, except for the speed. Mine was a good bit slower. and I can promise you all that because by the time he was coming down, I had just made it up there. So, anyways, it's time for y'all to see this video and take a look at a couple of the. Do you have a couple of pictures with us as well? Like, oh yeah, it's right down here. So we'll show these here in a second, folks. But here's the video from none other than Enforcer Matt.
All right, folks, you join me at Red Pine Lake. It's about 2,100 feet of elevation, about 4 miles up from the top of the Alta area of the Little Cottonwood, actually, Little Wasatch. That's not the name of it. But as you can see, though, it is absolutely beautiful out here, a beautiful lake. They say that if you camp out here, you can see moose, maybe bear, but moose probably drinking water out of this lake right here in the morning. Sadly, though, I'm not camping today. I'm just simply hiking up here. I got my camping gear with me. Just in case it took longer than I thought. But it turns out I will not need to be camping here tonight, and I probably won't. So this is what it looks like. What a beautiful view, by the way. I mean, look at that. I'm gonna try to pan the camera around so you can see it. There's actually still snow on the mountains up there as well that you can see up there. And also you can see all the trees, and it's just very beautiful. Also out this way, you can see there is all the Wasatch Mountains behind me. So it almost looks like I'm in a movie set. The way it looks out here, it's really, really wild, actually. I'll say this, though. The hike up here absolutely kicked my butt coming up here. Fell down once. It was actually snowy a bit coming up, so that was a bit treacherous. I'm about to have to go all the way back down. Luckily, going down is a lot easier than coming up. But what a view. I plan on camping here eventually, but not right now. But what a beautiful place. Red Pine Lake. Gotta check it out.
Man.
Also, by the way, man, I gotta tell you,
you sound like you're dying.
Right, honestly, I was dying. That was actually the second take of the video because there were some people sitting like off to the left. So I was sitting there like trying to stay out of their way. I wasn't trying to disturb them. They were like sitting over there. I think it was a couple or something like that. So I was trying to go off to the corner to go film it over there, so I didn't bother them. But I kept seeing them over there, and I was already dying on a second take because the first one I was like barely I was huffing so much. I got to re-record this. It sounds horrible. So this one I was actually doing better. But also, by the way, like out of all the scenery, like I love it. People were pointing out, hey, that's the way he actually sounds. Yeah, that's my actual voice. I know it does not match my face, by the way. Like my voice is like really out of proportion for how I look, like a lot. I was blessed with a narrator's voice, but it doesn't match my looks. Like I look too young to make this sound, like for my tone. Like I look too young. I'm 25, by the way, so I think some people think I'm still in high school. Like I'm obviously no longer in high school. I've been through everything at this point. I've been through college, law school, everything. So you know, interesting though. But it was a beautiful lake. Like you can see the water there. Like it's like the water is like multicolored, like the beginning of it. So it was just really cool.
Also got a load of extra pictures to show y'all as well to share with y'all here from our adventure on the way up. If you want to follow along, Matthew, I actually took a load of pictures basically from the start all the way to the top. I really didn't take any on the way back down though because I was dead at that point. I think Matthew and me were both saying at the end of it that we've never been as physically exhausted before doing this than anything else. Back in Alabama one time, we went on like a hike through Oak Mountain State Park, and I think the round trip like distance we did that day, what was that, Matthew? Like 12 or 14 miles or something, and we were kind of sore the next day, but hardly at all, because it was basically flat compared to what we did here. But this is basically like the height from the ground level that we started at to the top where the lake was at is basically the height of the Burj Khalifa. So we basically went all the way up the Burj Khalifa on like this giant 4-mile long slope. And then went all the way up and then made it to the top and then had to go all the way back down it all in one day. So this is the first view you get, starting on the first picture and then moving our way to the right, so that way Matthew can follow along. This is actually the view that you get very early on the hike once you make it past the Gloria Falls area and around the kind of mountain ridge, is that you get this view all the way down Little Cottonwood Canyon into Salt Lake, which I love that view. It's one of my favorite parts of the hike. Then you get the side view here, taking same place, just different angle, looking towards the left. You can see the mountains that you're about to climb on up into along the rest of the trail. Then once you get further up, there's this stream or creek basically that's formed from the Red Lake where the water overflows it and then goes down this ravine here. That was a really scenic spot, really cool. And then you also have like the granite face cliffs as you're going up. Like this is getting very close to the lake at this point where these pictures are. You also get to see the mountains. You're basically at the level of like the red rocks on the other mountains on the other side of Little Cottonwood at this area. And then you get to the Red Pine Lake right here. And these were my pictures that I took of it.
Man, also, by the way, I'm not even ashamed to say this, by the way. I did not use my micro spikes when I got there toward the snow, which the micro spikes, by the way, if you're not aware, they're like bungee corded like spikes that go on the bottom of your shoes. So you're supposed to put those on when you get towards snow, but I didn't. I thought I could handle it just fine. There was only like a couple of patches of snow here and there, but I got up like literally, I was like 50 feet or 100 feet away from the lake, and there was like a snowpack that I had to walk over. I'd gotten over like all of them just fine until that point. I got to the snowpack right before I got to the lake. I busted my ass so damn hard. Like, thinking God that nobody saw me do that because I busted my ass so hard. I stepped one foot too fast on the snow and didn't properly get a good footing. And I was like, I saw the lake, so I was trying to get over there quick. I busted my ass, nearly slid right back down the damn thing, like probably about 100 feet back down to the bottom. I wouldn't have gotten hurt. It would have just been a pretty rough ride back down 100 feet. But I got up, I was like making sure nobody was around. You know how when you fall and stuff like that, like you always got to do a scan around, you got to do a 360, make sure nobody saw it. I was like, thank God nobody saw it. And I hightailed it over to the lake, but I thankfully though, didn't get injured out of the whole thing.
Man, I'll tell y'all, folks, I never slipped and fell like Matthew did. Matthew, like, he had, like, dirt on the back of his pants. He told me, like, I got up there, he's like, man, I ate shit. Like, I was like, what? And I was like, what do you mean, you fell? He was like, yeah, I never fell, but I was nearly dead when I made it up to the top, because, as y'all will know, I'm not in the greatest of shape. I'm not as lean as Matthew, and I'm also not as fit as Matthew. So doing this was like a huge challenge for me, because it was nearly about to kill me. And it felt like that when we started going back downhill, because the sun was starting to set and we had to really keep up the speed. And my legs are so shredded from that today. They feel like they're in a constant agony. They've been in agony through the whole show. But when I made it up to the top, it felt like it was worth it, though, because you get this view of this lake. And also what's even cooler is that you get to look at the most Swiss-sounding mountain peak, the Pfeiffer Horn, which is in this picture right here. That's the Pfeiffer Horn up there, which is that peak. And then you also get to look over at Mount Baldy, which is this one right over here. And those are the two peaks surrounding this little lake. So we can
Also, by the way, to mention this, by the way, I see people saying that looks like Rattlesnake City right there. Most rattlesnakes out here, the Great Basin rattlesnake is what Utah has and Salt Lake area has them. They're definitely out here, but they stay below about I think it's like 7,500 feet. They stay below that because once you start getting higher than that, they don't really have the prey that they're looking for to be able to survive on. So if you go higher than that and you go to the elevation we were at here, that was up to 10,000 feet, your odds of running across a rattler up here is very, very small. I have seen snakes up here though, but it's like a garter snake or something like that, a non-venomous like snake. They're harmless for the large degree. They're just looking for little small rodents. But the rattlesnakes mostly aren't up here. Your biggest concern at that lake is moose. There's definitely moose up there. I didn't see any when I went up here, but they go drink water out of the lake, like I was mentioning in that video I just made on Patreon. And you got to look out for them. Because moose are extremely dangerous if you mess with those. Like they'll stomp you to death unless you can hide behind a tree or something. It gets really sketchy. There's some bear up there as well, but I never saw those. And also black bear is what's out here. They're skittish. They don't want to mess with people. We don't have grizzlies out here in Utah. But the moose, though, that's a big one.
Yeah, those, and also mountain goats as well, which is a very big thing up here, apparently, from what I've heard from folks. But also the last picture here, this is just what the trail looks like. I got to tell you, folks, I don't know about y'all, but I know Matthew will agree with this. I hate the trails because there's so many rocks in them. And it hurts the feet so badly after a while that it feels like you're walking on like straight up needles sticking out of the ground. I really enjoy hiking, but this last one got miserable at the end because it was way too long of a distance, at least in my physical shape, to tackle in a day. And also the trails in these mountains are very, very rocky, so there's never any even footing. Like your ankles are always at angles and stuff as you're going up and down it, and you're like, the rocks are also small enough and jagged enough sometimes that you kind of just have to step on them, and it's like stepping on like nails and stuff, which it gets very painful after like 8.5 miles of that. But outside of that, though, it's a beautiful trail. Really, honestly, the whole mountain range. I would say that the Lone Peak sort of a mountain range or the Lone Peak Wilderness is probably my favorite in the whole area. We've gone to Big Cottonwood a couple of times, and it's got its own thing going for it, but I'm really more of a fan of the Little Cottonwood down here rather than the Big Cottonwood further on up at Solitude and stuff. It's just got better scenery here, and I also like the alpine kind of environment that it has because it's a lot more alpine feeling than what you get in Big Cottonwood, which feels more like Western Rockies American. This is alpine, like legitimately
Oh,
alpine.
yeah. I'll say this. I see some people saying that looks like that'd be fun to hike up that. And when we first moved down here to Utah, I could have never hiked that, like up to
No.
Red Pine Lake. I would have like probably died halfway up it for the most part. Also, we've gotten acclimated to the altitude. We've been out here for I think a little over 6 months or just at 6 months or something like that, and we've gotten acclimated to it. But when I first got out here, though, I felt the altitude sickness, like even lower than 10,000 feet. I felt it. Like I felt it at like 6 and 7 thousand feet. I felt altitude sick, a lot like lightheaded a little bit and a little bit of a headache. But it went away after a couple of months. We got acclimated to it. But at 10,000 feet, though, the air is definitely thinner. Like you start huffing a lot harder at 10,000 feet, so you can feel it. But if you're not used to it, though, it's really going to get you bad.
Yeah, it would get you horrendously. I remember the first time we came out here, we were dying just to get up to that Bear Canyon suspension bridge, which is only 500 feet up from the parking lot. And I remember that was tough back in the day. We were like, damn, this is like one hell of a climb. And that compared to what we did yesterday, you would have to do the Bear Canyon hike 5 times over to get the same kind of thing that we got from that hike yesterday, in like height and distance and everything, which is
I think
mental.
you can get hypoxia. Yeah, like I think you can actually get hypoxia if you go high enough up, like the Pfeiffer Horn or something, like to the highest points on this mountain. If you're not acclimated to, I think you can actually have like some serious things like that happen to you.
Yeah, you actually can. Like people, like like you actually have to do altitude training, and that's why they say that in like mountaineering and stuff like that, you actually have to reach like certain levels and certain qualifications before you go to the next. Not for like any licensing or anything like that, or like like a black belt in karate. It's just that if you're not prepared for that level yet, and you jump to the next one above it, you could get in serious trouble and die. But I don't think it would be a big problem out here for us because I mean we were at 10,000 feet and Fiverhorn's only at 11, so it's an extra 1,000 feet. And the air, like the air difference in those kinds of altitude differences isn't that big, especially like down here at these heights. But if you got up to stuff like say in the Himalayas, like where you went from like 20,000 to 22,000 feet, that actually is a big enough difference at that point because the oxygen is dissipating quickly enough that you could actually get hypoxia and stuff at those altitudes.
Yeah, I would say so, but it's a very nice, very nice environment. I'll say this: I don't think I'm quite as bad off as Andrew, but I will say, like, I actually feel pretty messed up today. Like, I'm sitting in my chair now, and I don't really want to move. Like, my legs are wrecked, my arms are wrecked. Also, I was carrying an entire pack of about 20 pounds in it because I wasn't sure if I was going to have to camp up there or not. And it was Monday, so we were off on the stream, so I could have pulled it off if I wanted to, but I didn't have food with me. So I was like, if I have to stay up here, I'm going to have to be hungry the entire night for the large degree. But I was like, if it turns dark, I'd rather camp up here than start moving through the trail at night. Because at night's when the mountain lions and all this other stuff starts coming out looking for food and hunting, and you don't really want to be hiking through the forest, when it's pitch black at night and you can't see.
Also, Loco Zoco said Everest does not sound fun. Honestly, after doing hikes like this, I don't really know where anyone finds the need to go to Everest because this is enough for me. I could never imagine going to Everest. And also on top of that, with Everest, it's not really like anything where you're actually hiking. You got like an oxygen tank on. You've got loads of Sherpas supporting you. So it's like a guided tour to the top and then back down. It's not like real hiking kind of. And what's funny, folks, is that there's like this whole argument going on around Everest. I've been watching that stuff for a while, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's not real hiking anymore because now people are like using a nitrogen oxygen mix to completely miss the Sherpas and just climb up on their own and back down in like a day or two." And I'm like, I don't know how those people are doing that. They've got to be like of extreme physical fitness. I could never do that. I would die. Like I would legitimately just die up there. But really crazy, cool stuff to go see, and it was a fun time. But like it was fun scenery, fun time, however, and like my body says otherwise. But anyways, with that, we are on to the live chat for Ella McWheel's NAFO. And what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so the live chat is going to go to none other than Cannon, who said, what are the chances that you think the memorandum of understanding is actually followed through that the United States has agreed to?
Highly unlikely, in my opinion. Iran is a terrorist state. They never really follow through with their word. And considering that they really didn't follow through with their word on the JCPOA, we have no reason to believe they'll be following through with this. So I hope that does address that live chat the best I can. And a big thanks to you once again for that incredible support and helping this channel to keep it running, Ella McWheels NAFO. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to none other than Con45. And thank you very much, Con, for that $50 support. And we do appreciate that very much. Sadly, though, I can't read the super chat because it makes some allegations that some folks that could be viewed as unsavory, possibly, and it might get us in some trouble. So sadly, I can't read it right there. But just to paraphrase it, just to still sort of address the spirit of what Con was trying to say, he believes, generally speaking, that this reconstruction deal is not a good idea and that there might be something fishy with it. I'll just leave it at that to sort of keep it vague. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that that's a very interesting statement, and you never know these days. But a big thanks to you once again, and with that, we're on to the next one.
I also have a $50 support from Monster Buck, Pennsylvania. And thank you very much, Monster Buck, for that $50 support as well. I think that might be your first ever support. We do appreciate that. He said, please explain what LSA means.
LSA stands for the Lee Spring Army, which is the community that exists here on this amazing channel. Everybody who is an active subscriber of the Enforcer channel is considered a member of the Lee Spring Army, and the name of the Lee Spring Army comes from a joke that started in the first month of the channel's history, where I mistook Lee Spring suspension as being obsolete on a Russian air defense system. Many a people, they flamed me, they derided me, they attacked me for getting it wrong. And honestly, they were kind of right. But it was funny. It was hilarious. It became a hoot over the next 2 days. And so I said on air, y'all are kind of like the Lee Spring people out here in this audience. And then someone in the chat said, we're like a Lee Spring Army. And thus the name was born. After that, we started to attach a whole bunch more seriousness to it. The name is a joke, but we try and make it have actual beliefs. We've given it a flag, an anthem, pro-Western, pro-American beliefs where we largely remain apolitical and we look at situations for what they are in support of American and Western interests. And we also try and support the interest of the public good. So that's the LSA, what it is, where it came from, and what it's about. So a big thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that has addressed that incredibly well, Monster Buck. And with that, it actually appears that we have some news right now. What in the world do we have?
So believe it or not, we actually have some breaking news at this late hour of the night during the question segment. We've currently gotten some proof that appears to show that multiple loaded Iranian oil tankers have officially left the port of Chabahar and they crossed the U.S. blockade line without being stopped. So that seems to corroborate reports that apparently the U.S. blockade is no longer in effect, and they're letting the Iranian ships out of the area. So it looks like before Iran's even stopped attacking ships of their own, the U.S. is letting Iran sell their oil and leave already. So, you know, the U.S. is holding up their end of the agreement, it looks like, by opening the blockade, which is an interesting idea. But at the same time, Iran's not upholding their end because they're still firing on ships with drones and possibly missiles, and also apparently still not holding up their end. So yeah, very interesting.
That is quite interesting, and I would say that this is something to watch. We'll have to see what it turns into. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat's going to go to my Trucking Travels, who puts in a $20 support. And thank you very much, good sir, as well, for that generous support. He said, thank you, guys, for all the hard work. I know this week has been depressing, but all we can do is push through and come together. He said, still in Salt Lake City. I've been here a week now, LOL, and LLT, LSA.
And thank you so much for enjoying our hard work, my Trucking Travels. And also, I hope you've been enjoying Salt Lake City for the week you've been here. Just make sure to watch out for those folks in downtown. I gotta tell you. But beyond that, I gotta say, a big thanks to you for support. I would have to say, it's been quite depressing. We try and downplay it at this point on air because we don't want to get on air every single night and have a bitching, moaning fest, basically, because it feels like sometimes that's what it's about to turn into, because if y'all can't tell, we clearly hate what's going on. It's as un-American as it can get in supporting American Western interests. And, you know, if anybody says otherwise, folks, I've just taken it at this point, and I mean no offense, but to the people I say this about, if they get offended, it doesn't even matter. The people who support this kind of stuff, are not even American patriots. They're people who support some sort of cult of worship or cult of personality and some sort of a bandwagoning mob, and they're not even to be reasoned with, and I don't even think they have the intellectual capability to be worthwhile to talk to at this point. That's why I thought about the other political group during the last administration, because they'd also act a lot like this when their guys were in charge, and now the current group's doing that to the point that you really can't even talk to them legitimately anymore because they got their heads so far up their own ass. The president could literally unconditionally surrender to the Russians. They'd say it's a great thing and it's a pro-American thing and it's a wonderful thing, and it's gotten ridiculous at this point. But beyond that, though, I do have to say that regardless of that, the United States is still a great country. It's just going through one of the worst times in foreign policy I think we've ever seen in the country's history, and I'd hope that at this point, the public, which I'm sure is a lot more discerning than we'd be led to believe on the internet, has seen this and will be making the appropriate decisions come around election time, because I've got to be honest with you all, I think the country can't really take a lot more of this. Usually whenever people say someone's openly destroying the country, that's a bit of a exaggeration, but as far as foreign policy is going at this point, there's really no way to make an argument that the country's better off. It's clearly doing worse off at this point, and we can't keep continuing down such a destructive path as this for that much longer. By the end of the next 3 years, the U.S. is going to be in an unrecoverable position if it keeps up like this. But beyond that, though, I do thank you for the incredible support and help of this channel to keep it running, and long live the Lee Spring Army to you, and with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, so our next one's going to go to Mr. Glock Glock, who's there, who puts in a $20 support. And thank you very much, Mr. Glock, for that support. We do appreciate that. He said, hey, Matt, is it true that Enforcer has a more man lady friend?
Oh, no, that's not true at all. But I do thank you so much for the support and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from AstroPixel Gaming, and thank you very much, AstroPixel, as well, for the 20. And they said, thank you for providing unbiased, real news I can't get anywhere else in the States. And you guys are sincerely the best, and stay strong, gentlemen. And I appreciate you a ton.
And we appreciate you, AstroPixel Gaming, for supporting the channel so we can stay on air and keep providing the news like this. And I gotta say, thank you so much for enjoying the unbiased news. We try our best, and we try and make sure to report it for what it is. And we will always be staying strong as long as people continue to back us and support us out there in words and support, because y'all help us to stay on air and be encouraged to keep going on air every day to keep covering this news. And so with that, humongous thanks to you so much once again. We appreciate you a ton, massively, for the support. And with that, we're about to
leave it.
Oh man, I'm seeing it's like you know, it's like that's that kind of stuff you can't even be reasoned with. Like saying, like connecting the words, like, oh, you got me. It was kryptonite. Channel's destroyed. Like, good one. You destroyed the left wing or whatever. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next super chat here is going to go to none other than Blind Man, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Blind Man, for that support. He said, movie recommendation, Pressure. It follows Captain James Stagg's meteorological forecast deciding the landing decision for D-Day. A perfect blend of real footage, film, and acting, and highly recommend watching this and live chat on me.
And a big thanks to you for the support, Blind Man Nix. And I gotta say, I will have to check that movie out. I think it's still in theaters right now, and sadly I didn't get to watch it yesterday, because Monday's kind of like my movie theater day these days. But if I have the next Monday free, and I'm able to go to the movie theater, I'll definitely watch that one, because I was thinking, oh, man, I want to go back to the movie theater and watch a movie. But I didn't know which one to watch, because I watched The Backrooms, and I watched Obsession, which are really kind of the two movies that I was very interested in. Sadly, folks, I'm just not really interested in the Star Wars stuff. I know The Mandalorian and Grogu's out, but, you know, Star Wars has been so Disney-ified, it's not even interesting anymore to me. Like, they've done so much whitewashing to it and everything, it's just not really an interesting fictional world anymore. So I just didn't go and watch that one. But beyond that, I will definitely have to check out that movie, because that one does sound very interesting, Blind Man. And so, with that, a huge thanks to your support. We will make sure to get a live chat in your honor.
All right, so the live chat in honor of Blind Man is going to go to none other than Shadow Knight, who said, what is going to happen when the Ukraine war ends? Will you guys still do this, or will it end, or will it change? And we've covered such global news at this point. Our coverage, I'll be honest, our coverage used to depend on what was happening in Ukraine, but not anymore. Like we cover global news now, so we shifted just from one focus to several different focuses. So there's always going to be news happening. Like I would challenge anybody to name a single point in history where there hasn't been something happening globally, conflict wise. The world's always at war, and there will always be a need to report on that. So we'll be here as long as that's happening. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, generally, in my honest opinion, that we're going to keep covering this forever. I mean, like, really, sadly for our line of business, there's never going to be a shortage of wars. And so, as long as we're able to cover world news like that, even if there was a lack of war for some reason, there's still enough going on in the world that we could cover that would be of interest, at least about the battles between the spheres of influence that exist these days, that we would be able to stay on air. Back in the day, we covered Ukraine exclusively. We were a Ukraine war channel. And back in the day, I actually told Matthew, I remember saying this. I was like, we need to make sure that we are not stuck in the Ukraine war category. We need to evolve into the world news category because algorithmically, considering that this, like at that point that this was being said, folks, we had already dropped out of law school and had moved on to this full time. And I was saying that for like longevity reasons, like this is our career now, so this needs to be something that can last and that we'll be able to keep covering forever. So we need to move on into something that will always last, which is world news, because something's always going on somewhere in the world that we can cover. In Ukraine every day, that might not be the case, and every war will eventually end. So we started to slowly eke our way over into the world news category in the algorithm, which we succeeded in doing years ago, and then we've stayed in that category since, which is really the reason why the channel has blown up so much, because if you look at most of the subscribership over the past several years and where most of our subscribers have come from, interestingly enough, most of them haven't come from Ukraine at all. Probably mostly not even an iota over really the past 2.5 years. Most of them have come from our coverage in the Middle East and East Asia. So that actually ended up working out fairly well. So the answer to your question is, when the Ukraine war ends, the channel keeps running. At this point, it is a news channel covering anything in the world that's happening. So big thanks to you for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a $20 support from Zyper Sniper. And thank you very much, Zyper, for that $20 support. And we do appreciate that very much. And Zyper said, a coffee fund for the enforcers. And did you know that the Vikings actually raided and settled in Russia in 800 and 900 AD? So Scandinavia invaded and occupied a big part of Russia. And question to the chat, please.
That's actually correct, Zyper Sniper. What's interesting about that, however, is that they really didn't invade Russia per se. They actually invaded Kyiv through the Dnieper River, or the Dnieper River, if we're calling it by its Ukrainian name. And that's how they founded the Kievan Rus, which would then go on to create Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. But Ukraine is actually the epicenter, culturally, of the entire, I guess you could say, what they call the modern Russian cultural tree. Really, actually, the Ukrainians are the ones at the epicenter. So, crazily enough, Russia is actually an offshoot of Ukrainian culture along with Belarus. Poland's also argued to be a part of that group as well, but I'd say that the connection isn't as strong as it is with Belarus and Russia, because those cultural groups are actually very similar to each other in reality. Poland is more distinct in its own right. I would say that Poland's kind of off in its own group with the Czechs, the Slovakians, and the Lithuanians, more so than Belarus and Ukraine. But a big thanks to your support, Zyper Sniper. You're actually absolutely correct with that. And we will make sure to get a question from the live chat. So, Matthew, what do we got?
And this one right here goes to Kyle, who said Ukraine is now more prepared and battle hardened than when Russia annexed Crimea. And do you think Ukraine can hold it into the future now?
Yes, I think so. Ukraine has gone through so many military reforms over the past 10 years, since the Donbass conflict, really the past 12 years, that the Ukrainian army of 2014 doesn't even look remotely similar to what it is in 2026. It's an entirely different fighting force, far more professional, far more efficient, far more organized, and logistically a lot more capable. So I would say that they will be able to hold no matter what, because I mean, like, if you actually followed, folks, all of the reforms that have been done since 2014, and I wish I had enough time here to even talk about all of them that were done under Petro Poroshenko and Zelensky pre-war, it's unbelievable. I mean, even the leaps they made before the war started in Ukraine, which, you know, from then to now, that's a tectonic leap in what they've turned into in the present day from just 2022. If you looked at what they did from 2014 to 2022, that was insane in its own right. They went from this I mean, absolutely shitty group of conscripts that were just poorly equipped, poorly paid, hardly organized. They had almost no supply capabilities to speak of, and their tactics were just absolutely horrendous. I mean, they were old Soviet tactics of like the 80s. They went from that, which was awful. Like, that's why they didn't even make any ground against the Donbass separatists, lightly supported by the Russians, is because they were that bad off. Then Petro Poroshenko was elected, and he conducted the 2018 army reforms, which largely started to shift the Ukrainian army from almost a purely conscript force to a purely professional force, meaning that everyone was a volunteer on a contract at higher pay. And then from there, all the way up until 2022, Zelensky then took the reins and then reformed the Ukrainian army into what was almost a NATO-level force, at least organizationally before the war, but equipment-wise, they were still generally Soviet. And then they went from that, when they entered the war in 2022, largely NATO in tactics and structure, but still Soviet in equipment. Nowadays, they're not even NATO in equipment. They've become their entirely own fighting force technologically, which is a very rare enigma in the modern world. So, I mean, absolutely unbelievable stuff. But I hope that does answer the live chat well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Grand Moff Clubby. And thank you very much, Grand Moff, for that $20 support. And they said 13 U.S. men and women died during the war against Iran. And for what? A deal that basically says we surrender, question mark, leaving us worse off than before. And this has me really upset. I just want to cry. It feels like they died for nothing. And generally, I would have to say I actually agree with that completely, actually. There's really no way. I mean, if looking at it, I always like to look at stuff from the devil's advocate point of view, just to put myself into other people's shoes that think the other perspective. I mean, if you try to argue that we achieved something, I mean, what could you say we achieved? I mean, technically, I guess you could say we sunk several of Iran's naval ships. That's one thing we achieved. We didn't take out Iran's missile capability. They still have it. That's how they were able to attack the U.S. bases and also Israel as well. They still have their drones left over. They still have their regime intact. They still have their nuclear dust intact. They still have their nuclear program intact, for that matter. So I'm not really sure if we can say that really anything was achieved, really. So, you know, it's really all for nothing. $100 billion in the hole from military spending. Also, a $300 billion reconstruction fund. We're not really sure where the money's coming from. And also 13 U.S. men and women dead as a result of it. And now, apparently, Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. So we're worse off and we've lost people. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would sadly have to agree. It achieved absolutely nothing. And I think that that's very insulting because I remember, and this is something, folks, that I found tacky at the time, and it's even tackier now thinking about it. But during the last campaign that was had in 2024, and I'm not getting political here, but I am going to have to bring up something that I thought was very tacky at the time. It was brought up during the 2024 election that the U.S. soldiers that were guarding the Kabul International Airport that were blown up and killed were completely forgotten by the last president. The president didn't care. Say their names. Say them out loud. And they made this whole deal about the current guy knows their names, but the sitting president doesn't. That's because he doesn't care and he hates them and wants them all dead. And everybody leaned into that heavily, and I thought that was pretty sick to use dead soldiers as a political campaign sort of a slogan. You know, say their names. It's like, you know, this isn't really the place where, like, politics is a pit of vipers. The death of our citizen soldiers should never be lingering in that sort of a space. Nowadays, with 13 soldiers dead, basically everybody in America has completely forgotten them. Like, nobody really remembers their names. The president never mentions them. The president doesn't even care, really. I mean, if you look at how the war has been concluded, I mean, we clearly don't care about their sacrifice for the republic, or anyone else's sacrifice for the hundreds of wounded in the name of this republic. We basically expended so many of our citizen soldiers' health and some of their lives, over a dozen of them, to achieve nothing and lose plenty. I mean, we've lost the Hormuz. We've lost an international waterway that's critically important to global economic function, and we achieved absolutely nothing else of what we actually set out in the war to do with Iran. That's a complete and abysmal failure. And not only that, what about the humanitarian side? The president made a whole huge deal about at the start of the war as well, about how the 40,000 people in Iran that were killed were going to be avenged. We didn't avenge a soul. They're all dead, sitting in mass graves, unmarked mass graves in Iran. The Islamic regime that killed them is still in charge. And we've done absolutely nothing to avenge that crime against humanity. We've done nothing to protect our national security interests. We've done nothing. I mean, it's been an absolute waste. And for a country like ours, a country that I love and believe in dearly, to see it suffer such a tremendous defeat because of the lack of willpower and incompetence of a few elected officials is something that I find wildly insulting beyond my wildest imaginations. I can never imagine in any other point in U.S. history such a blistering defeat not being handed to the United States by an enemy force, but by our own elected officials and their lack of care and incompetence. But a big thanks to you for the support and help this channel to keep it running. I hope that does address that the best I can, at least with my honest opinion on this. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one is going to go to Soldier of Steel, who put in a 10. And thank you very much, Soldier, for that $10 support. He said, hello from the UK, and I always enjoy the broadcast, and thank you for standing up for truth, integrity, liberty, and unabashed Atlanticism in an ever isolationist world. And it's good to hear sane voices and LSA.
And thank you so much for the support, and thank you for enjoying what we say. Transatlanticist, I mean, that's a pretty interesting way of putting it, but it's honestly pretty accurate. I would say that we're more so pro-spherist, a pro-American spherist. I think that the American sphere that's been built since the Second World War is a very successful one, not only for the United States, but our allies as well. Everybody has stood to prosper under the sphere, and I stand, in my opinion, to defend that and to support that for as long as it is tenable. And as long as the United States is a good shepherd of the sphere of influence, then it is entirely tenable for you over there in the United Kingdom and us here in the States and everyone else that's a part of our grand alliance across the world over, even in far-flung regions like the Pacific. And I would say that I thank you greatly for enjoying our voice on air. We always wanted to stand up for the United States and our allies' interests, as the old saying goes, the rising tide raises all ships, and as long as the United States ensures that the tide is rising, then we all stand to benefit from it. So a huge thanks to you for support and help this channel to keep on running, and I hope that does address that incredibly well. And long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never truly die. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 10 from Blind Man once again, and thank you very much, Blind Man, for the $10 support. And he said, hello, LSA and Enforcers. I recently rewatched Midway, and what advantage did Japan have, assuming the carriers did not come from Pearl, instead of what really happened? They stressed that in the movie.
Let's see. What advantage did Japan have, assuming the carriers did come from Pearl, instead of what really happened? I think you're talking about the carriers that escaped Pearl Harbor because they were out on a training exercise. The reason why that was important is because at that point in naval warfare, it had already largely been understood that the age of the battleship was beginning to wane and the power of the carrier reigned supreme at sea. And World War II was really the war that showed that off the best, especially in the Pacific. And during the attack on Pearl Harbor, the main targets, which were the three capital ships, the carriers that we had in Honolulu, were actually out on training exercises and were therefore not found by the Imperial Japanese Navy. And also, as a result, were not destroyed and sunk. So while they were able to knock out most of our older battleships, they weren't able to take out the carriers. So when the Battle of Midway came around, that actually gave us a humongous advantage, because while we did not have the capital ships like the battleships and whatnot, that really didn't matter. We still had the cruisers, we still had the destroyers, and we had the carriers to boot. And with our carriers operational and available for the Battle of Midway, we were able to leverage our superior air power over the Midway Atoll and against the Imperial Japanese Navy off to the west near to Midway, and we were actually able to sink and destroy a decent amount of their capital ships, including a couple of their carriers, which was a very important start to the war, because during the Battle of Midway, we largely knocked out most of Japan's experienced naval air arm and also an experienced part of their carrier fleet in that opening battle, which set us off in a very good position for the rest of the conflict. Really, honestly, though, the problem is that Japan was set to lose no matter what. Even if we lost the Battle of Midway, the war would have dragged on the Pacific for a little bit longer, but not that much longer, because materially Japan was going to lose. The oil embargo that we had imposed on them in 1940 had already bled most Japanese oil reserves dry, and because of that, they really just didn't have the logistical capabilities that we had. So kind of like with Russia and Ukraine, Japan was just doomed to lose because they just didn't have good logistics. We could outbuild them and outshoot them and outmaneuver them every single day, and so they would inevitably lose the conflict. One thing that might have happened, however, that would have changed how history turned out is that if the Japanese had survived longer, the Soviet Union would have invaded the entirety of the Korean Peninsula, and there wouldn't be a South Korea today. It would just be North Korea. That would be the only country on the Korean Peninsula. But that would be about the only difference. So I hope that does address it the best I can if I'm understanding the question correctly. And a big thanks to you for the support and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on the next one.
And our next one here goes to Whippled F-150. And thank you very much, good sir, for that support. And that's a strong F-150. I bet the thing's got some power. But he said, another longtime listener and first-time supporter. And thank you for the news and keeping it politically neutral as possible and just the facts themselves.
And I thank you incredibly for the support. And I got to say, thank you so much for being a first-time supporter tonight. We're greatly appreciative of that. And also, a Whippled F-150, that's got some power. But beyond that...
Do you know what that is, though? Do you even know what that is?
No, I'm just repeating what you said, actually, just to agree with you.
That means it's supercharged right there. I think Whipple makes superchargers right there. So if you throw one of those on an F-150 V8, that gives a little boost.
Oh, it's like a superheater on the steam engine. That's neat. Or a supercharger on like a diesel engine. That's pretty cool, actually. That's pretty neat. But beyond that, though, I do have to say thank you so much for enjoying us, keeping the show politically neutral as possible, and presenting the information as it comes out, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have here a $10 support from Lee Mitchell. And thank you very much, Lee, for that $10 support right there. And we do appreciate it very much. I'll just double check and make sure he did not leave a comment. And it does not appear he did. But a huge shout out to you, Lee, once again. And Enforcer, what say you?
And a big thanks to you for the support, Lee Mitchell. We're greatly appreciative of it. And I got to thank you greatly for helping this channel to keep on running. Because folks like you make this thing possible. And we're on the next one.
We also have a 10 from Jake, and Jake said, compare this to the initial agreement that the U.S. used, and what does Somalia, let's see here, what does this mean exactly? I'm not sure what this means. I'm not sure about this one. But Enforcer, what do you?
I'm a bit confused myself, actually, because I don't really know how Albania leans into everything.
Man, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's something here that we shouldn't read or not, but thank you very much, Jake, for that support right there, and we do appreciate that. I would agree we need some transparency out here, but we also have a 10 from Siri, who said, the shenanigans will continue until all the Lulu nincompoops have been relocated. Keep up great work, Enforcer Bros. EXO from Oslo.
And a big thanks to your support, Siri, and helping this channel to keep on running, and thank you so much for saying that these people are going to be going to Novaya Zemlya, because I think that eventually they will at the Russian top echelons. But a huge thanks to you once again, all the way out there in Oslo, Norway. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have here a 10 from Blind Man once again. And thank you very much, Blind Man, for, I believe, the third support of the night. And Blind Man said, I love hiking. Getting ready to hike Blanca Peak in Colorado. It's 20.5 miles and 6,700 feet of elevation.
Yeah.
First real challenge. Most I've done is mountain bike Hartman Rocks out by Gunnison, Colorado. And I hope you make it, Blind Man. I hope you make it. I'll tell you this, 20 miles at 7,000 feet of elevation, good luck to you, because that's about as serious as it gets when it comes to hiking right there. So that's what they would call what they call the Black Diamond, I think it is. That's a hard one, it sounds like. So good luck to you. Please bring plenty of good stuff. Also, by the way, if you're hiking alone, make sure you bring a Garmin InReach or something with you, because you don't want to get stuck out there with a sprained ankle or like break a leg or something like that, and then you're stuck and you have no way to call for help. So that's what I carry with me. That's the text message thing, the 50 cents per message that the Enforcer didn't enter way back in the day. but you know, it happens. It happens. But Enforcer, what say you?
Hey guys, I'm gonna go up there on Blanca Peak. One day later, amazing grace. Here we're gathered today to mourn the loss of the Enforcer, gone but not forgotten. And then I'd be forgotten in like 15 minutes, reality be told. But outside of that, though, that is insane.
They ain't got no grizzlies out there, do they?
Oh, they got plenty of them.
They really?
I would assume so. I mean, it's like in the middle of nowhere in Colorado.
Let's see. Does Blanca Peak have grizzlies? How come Utah didn't have them then? No, it says no. Blanca Peak does not have grizzlies. In fact, there are no confirmed grizzly bears in the entire state of Colorado. They were hunted to extinction in the mid-20th century. So if you
Oh.
find a grizzly there, they're illegal alien if you find them there.
Man, you find one. Oh my God, it's a miracle! And then it like mauls you to death. Like,
Damn it, call Border Patrol. It's one of them grizzlies.
damn it, it's them trending agua people. Get the goods. Oh man, but beyond that though, I would tell you, 25 miles. You are a fitness geek right there, blind man. I would never be able to do that. 20.5 miles and 7,000 feet of total elevation. I almost died on 8 miles with 2,400 feet of elevation. That would be impossible for me, like absolutely impossible. But I gotta say, huge on you. Cool thing to hear that you're that fit. I wish I was that fit myself. And I hope you have a blast out there, because if I was a lot more fit, I have a feeling that Red Pine Lake Trail would have been an absolute blast and a real hoot, because the scenery was amazing. But I was focusing on trying to breathe. Also, folks, I think I need to go and like get checked out by a doctor, because every single time I get very physically overexerted, I start coughing, like I have bronchitis afterwards, like there's like phlegm and everything, and and I can also like taste like in my breath, like when I breathe in and out, it's almost like I can taste blood, and I don't know what that is, but that's been going on my whole life, like ever since I was a kid, and I've always wondered what the hell is going on with that, because I'm saying this, folks, because it makes it really hard for me to enjoy doing anything physical, because every time I do it, I feel like I'm like quite truly on death's doorstep at the end of it, because of all that stuff. So I'll have to see. I see Rat the Cat saying asthma. It probably is. That's what I'm thinking. Cigarettes? I don't smoke. Like, I don't smoke. Like that, dude. Hell no. I'm like avidly against smoking. I don't like the smell of tobacco, really. But maybe it is asthma. I see a lot of people saying that. Maybe it is. But outside of that, though, I do have to say a big thanks to you for the support, blind man, and I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you stay safe out there on that incredible hike. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have here a $10 support from Game Theory, and thank you, Game Theory, as well. They said, did you know this week downtown Los Angeles has been ranked one of the least vibrant downtowns on a list of 75 worldwide?
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, like, downtown LA is, like, pretty dead looking, like, when we went through it, and we only went through it for a second. But downtown LA has, like, those elevated roadways in it and stuff. It's really odd, honestly. Let me get the man and drop him down here real quick. Like, it's just empty down there in downtown LA. There's, like, nobody here at all. But it doesn't look bad. It's just there's nobody there. I would say, though, that, like, LA is a neat city, definitely worth visiting. I'm not going to, like, diss it and be like, oh, it's terrible. It's worth visiting. But it's just that it's not a place I really think I'd like to live. You know, I'm not really a huge fan of LA myself. But anyways, man, I just heard a cop horn. Someone, whoop, whoop. Hey, F you, man.
I just heard, like, you know, the cop horn, like it's that unique horn. It's just on the cop car. I heard that, and then I just heard somebody going, oh. Outside, I was like, what the hell's going on out there? I don't know what the hell's going on, man. I don't know if those are kids, like, messing around with each other or something, like, way out in the distance, or a cop's actually, like, tasing somebody or something out there. Somebody was screaming bloody murder outside just then.
Man, I wonder what happened out there, man. That sounds wild.
I know, man. It's like crazy stuff going on outside. I never heard nothing like that. That sound was very distinct. It was, it was like somebody was getting it.
Man, someone just got slammed by the cops out there. Bro, they probably said something about Legos.
They had a Lego set with them. That was enough to get them smacked down.
Oh, man. No, good Lord, folks. You know, the rule is out here, folks, in Utah right now. I heard this is the hard and fast rule. Do not carry a Lego set in the wide open and American fork. That's basically like begging for death or arrest or something along those lines. But anyways, a big thanks to you for bringing that up, man. And a big thanks to you, Game Theory, for the support. And with that, we're on the next one.
Man, I'd have looked the window up right now and y'all out there, get his ass, get him, get him. Like, egg on the cops out there. You got to be careful about egging on the cops, though, as the cops might actually go overboard. You never can tell. At least that's what they do in Alabama. You can't
hit him with the butt of the rifle. It's like, no. It's like,
oh, yeah, like this? No, not like that. I was just joking. Leave that man alone.
Man, next thing you know, breaking news: the enforcers are being canceled because Enforcer Matt leaned out of his window while the police were beating up a blind man because he was walking into the street, and they arrested him for jaywalking. Here's the video. I think you're gonna see the blind guy like with like the cane and everything and the glasses getting beat up. He's like, "What the hell?" And you're out the way. Yeah, get his ass. Man, that's like, bro, you do not want that look. Anyways, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 10 from August J. And thank you very much to August for that $10 support. It said, shout out to you guys and my wife, Erin, who watches every night. LOTLSA, and take one from the chat.
Hey, and a big shout out to you, August and Aaron, who enjoy this channel, I hope, greatly. And we will make sure to take one from the chat. But before we do, long live the Lee Spring Army. And what do we got?
And the one from the chat is going to go to none other than Miss Disa. And thank you, Miss Disa, for the question. She said, thoughts on the invocation of the Defense Production Act?
The Defense Production Act? On what in particular?
Let's see here. It says, U.S. invokes the Defense Production Act to boost weapons manufacturing as Iran war intensifies concerns. That largely hasn't been really, like, boosted very much today, like that story right there. I haven't seen it all day long until you just mentioned it just now. But yeah, it's being reported by several different major outlets.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't heard about that today either. I'm supposing that's trying to replace all of the ammunition that the president stated we had double the amount of once the war started, which we didn't. So I think that's the reason why. Oh, man, that's crazy. You know, he just said shit, and it was just completely untrue. Like, that's never been heard of before. He said, like, I don't know if y'all remember this, folks, but we bombed Iran for like a whole month, and we fired every Jasmine Tomahawk we basically had. And then at the end of it all, everyone's like, damn, you know, it sounds like from some U.S. officials, they're saying the stocks are running dangerously low. And then him and the vice president came out and said, actually, it's doing even better than before. We have twice the amount of bombs now, more than ever. And there's like no production going on in the country for that. So it's like, where did they come from? Do they just grow in like the fields? Do we harvest them like corn? Where in the world did those bombs come from? And they weren't anywhere. And that's what apparently this Defense Production Act is trying to fix, is the fact that we basically fired all of them and we have none left. And all of that stuff that was said earlier was just bullshit, basically. So I hope that does answer the question well, Misty. It's a good question, by the way, because I didn't hear about that myself until right now. And with that, we're on the next one.
And the next one here is going to go to none other than DWRB, who puts in a 10. And thank you, good sir, as well. He said, assuming this Iranian deal holds, how do you think, or how do you feel this affects the image of the United States in regards to China and Russia?
Makes us look so weak. We're basically a pushover at this point. Iran could probably attack the United States at this point, and we would offer them money and, you know, give up and give them anything they want to try and avoid a prolonged or protracted conflict. That's what it makes us look like. It makes us look like absolute spineless, pathetic cowards to a point that it's just unbelievable. I thought the last administration was cowardly. This administration makes the last administration look like they actually had a spine. And that's pretty sad to say, because there had never been as spineless a group of people in charge rather than the last administration until now. But the last administration and this one are doing irreparable damage to the U.S.'s reputation overseas and making us look very weak. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we're on the next one.
And our next one here goes to Game Theory, put in a 10. And Game Theory said, did you know polar bears are the only bear that will hunt humans?
Yes, I didn't know that. That's true. I actually watched a documentary on that where they'd hunt people down over hundreds of miles sometimes. Kind of wild to watch. But a big thanks to your support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a 10 from Kyle Padell, who said, look up the story in Oklahoma, Winganon space capsule. LOC destroying mainstream media on the daily.
Winging on space cap. Winging on space caps. What the hell we got here? Oh, that's that cement mixer. This is a cement mixer. That got dropped off accidentally on the side of the road, and then they spruced it up to look like a spaceship. So that's what that thing is.
Oh man, that's very convincing.
Very convincing, like really convincing. But a big thanks to you so much once again for support. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a 5 from Seabass Smith, and he said, I'm going back to Ukraine in 2 months. My wife is just waiting for the visa, and we've been together since 2019. I can't wait to see Russia lose soon.
And we can't wait either. And I hope you get to enjoy your time with your wife. And a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep running. And we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Craig Jones, and Craig said, if I was as well-spoken as you guys and could talk that fast, well, I would not have to drive a truck across America for a living. Well, thank you for the kind words, by the way. But truck drivers are honestly probably more important than we are these days, especially. But well, thank you for the kind words. But Enforcer, what say you?
If you weren't trucking around the country, we wouldn't be able to find food anywhere to eat, to be able to be on the show. I mean, like, I would have to agree with Matthew. You work a very important job. It's long, grueling hours, and I know that the trucking industry these days is not the romanticized sort of ideal that a lot of people think of when they think of it from, like, the 70s and the 80s, when trucking was really at its greatest. It was the golden age back then. But the job of a trucker is a very important one these days. And I would say never feel bad about your job. I know that it's hard, it's tiresome, it's grueling, and you have to stay away from your home and your family for incredibly long amounts of time to be a trucker. But y'all are incredibly important people to this national infrastructure network. And I hope that you find pride in that. If you try and find pride in the job outside of it being a very tough one, which I definitely have to agree with you. It's a very tough job. But a huge thanks to you for support and help this channel to keep it running and keep on trucking, as Go-Kart said. That was a pretty good one. And with that, we're on the next one.
Our next one here goes to Ulf Hednar, who puts into 5. And Ulf Hednar said, if I was the UK, I'd send a sub to do the disappearing magic trick in open water. I hear sunken ships make great coral reefs, plus the free fish food.
I would say that's not a bad idea, old Hednar. I would say the greatest trick would be to pull out the old classic hat trick. Sink the Russian ship, capture the surviving crew, and then hold them for ransom. The old hat trick. It works every time. You know why? Because, if they want to retaliate against the United Kingdom, oh man, it's a real sad thing, Those sailors, they might just be in an area that's about to get hit by a Russian missile, like, they got to be careful. There's their own countrymen in Britain. And I mean, like, I'm not saying, put them in harm's way, but I mean, knowing the Russians, they legitimately, like, accidentally hit them or deliberately hit them, thinking it was a military target. And it's like, it is what it is at that point for the Russians, I suppose. Ought to be more careful about those sorts of things. Oh, the old hat trick.
Oh no, I was queuing that up for a joke I was gonna make, but never mind. I just sort of like messed that up. But I guess a little drum roll there for the Russian stupidity, I guess.
Man, the old hat trick. It's a big thanks to your support. And with that, we're on the next one.
And our next one here is going to go to none other than My Trucking Travels Yet Again, who put in a 10. And thank you very much, good sir, as well, for the second support. He said, if the Russian lies collapse rapidly in Ukraine, what do you think the chances are that Putin will panic and launch a small battlefield tactical nuke to try to regain control? And we know the consequences.
I would say that the chances are actually somewhat slim, in my opinion at least. I think they're largely bluffing about using a nuclear weapon. And even if they are serious, that shouldn't really limit the Ukrainians at all in what they do. So generally, I would say for those reasons, the chances are probably low or very slim. So I hope that does address that well. And a big thanks to you for your support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on the next one.
Also, by the way, I see someone say, if you have asthma, you probably have some other autoimmune issue going on. There's a way that can become illegal, by the way. If you have a fully autoimmune disease, that's illegal. I'm sure the ATF will pay you a visit if you have a fully autoimmune disease. You know what I'm saying? You get it?
Oh, man, I'm about to get the ATF showing up to my door legitimately. We heard you had an autoimmune disorder. Do you have that registered with a tax stamp? It's a disease. No, sir, that's not. That's, step aside, we have a search warrant. I'm gonna be like, damn, man, I'm gonna be like, why do you do this? But anyways, it was a good joke, though. But with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have here a $10 support from Nick B. And thank you very much, Nick, for that support. He said, I am so incredibly disillusioned over the state of affairs with this whole Iran thing and how it makes us look. And thanks for covering it anyway and continuing to speak your mind. And I appreciate you guys.
I think
what's interesting, Nick, is the Iranians are probably going to be the ones to undo it all. This clearly favors Iran significantly, but knowing how they work, they'll probably end up undoing it. That's my guess. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally agree with that, but I'm quite disillusioned with it as well, Nick B, because I never get to talk. Like, I've talked to friends, and amongst friends that I talk to most of the time, they're like, the Enforcer's like the most patriotic American that they've ever met. And I don't really get to, like, just go through, like, the speeches I give about America and what it is and what it can be if we work hard and all that stuff on air. I don't do that a whole lot, at least often anymore. But, if y'all knew what I really thought about the country and how proud I am of the country and the people living in it and where it could go and what it could be, and then to see something like this happen, just pisses me off so much. It's selling the country so damn short for no reason at all, rather than just some guy that's in the White House right now. I got tired of it. I lost attention, and he just wanted to end it. And now he's going to move on because now at this point, basically the whole country exists for him to jump from strength to strength. He's now going to jump from Iran to Cuba, and who knows how that's going to go. Watching how this went in the Middle East. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on the next one.
That's a 5 from Prime Rib, who said, do you know what the Gulf states are saying about this deal? And it seems like they'd be upset.
We haven't really heard a lot from them, and we don't really know how upset they are. They might not be saying anything, and they might just be hoping for it to end so that way they can get their oil out of the region in the short term and then figure out something else to replace the strait in the long term at this point. But I do thank you incredibly for the support and helping this channel to keep running. That might be a possibility. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Live Animal, who said if Iran gets paid for opening Hormuz, it'll legitimize its claim on it, and no one ever listened to the USA and ME. Recent actions are a clue.
I would agree with you, Live Animal, and also on top of that, we're legitimizing their claim on it by signing a memorandum of understanding, basically giving it to them. So now we basically said it's theirs, and to change that, we're going to have to go to war with them at some point again in the future to reverse that, and that war will have to be a lot more deadly and a lot more lengthy and more costly because of the mistakes we made today. So a big thanks to you for your support. I hope that does address that well, and with that, we're on the next one.
We also have 5 from Ulf Hednar, who said, I can see Ukraine becoming an even global power, perhaps. They already exert influence in North Africa, and they will likely get involved in the war with China and Taiwan.
I would doubt that they get involved in the war with China and Taiwan because that would require them to have a navy and also overseas bases to operate from. And I don't really see Ukraine ever having the strategic need for something like that. They're certainly going to become a regional power, however. A lot like how the Russian Federation was pre-war. That's what Ukraine is going to become in the post-war era once this is concluded. No matter how it ends at this point, Ukraine is going to have a very strong economy because of its technological advances and also its strong industrial base that's created through the war. And that'll be making them a significant arms exporter, which will be able to bring in tax revenue for the government to be able to invest in other economic objectives in Ukraine that'll be able to advance their nation in gross domestic product and quality of life. So as a result of that, we'll definitely see them become a regional power with significant power projection capabilities in the near regions near to Ukraine. So big thanks to you for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Also, by the way, apparently a new article just came out right now about this MOU with Iran. It says here that U.S. officials are now urging caution about the Iran agreement text, describing the 1.5-page MOU for the officials that have seen it as a vague political document that omits key back-channel commitments from Tehran. And they said people shouldn't read too much into the language of the MOU, one official said. And another one said what's more important than the actual document is the understandings that they have with each other. So that's not a good sound right there. That's definitely not good. 1.5-page MOU. Apparently, there's not much detail in it, if that's actually how long it is. It's kind of a little bit concerning, to say the least. Apparently, it just says we surrender on it or something. But moving on to our next one here, this one goes to DWRB, who puts in a 5. And he said, unpopular theory, in the last 75 years, the U.S. has only won one war, the first Gulf War.
I would say some people have made that argument. I would say it's a okay one, but I generally believe that we've won more conflicts than that. We won the invasion of Grenada. We won Operation Just Cause, which was the invasion of Panama in 1980. We won generally the Korean War because our intention with the Korean War, at least initially, was just to support and enforce the 48th parallel as the divide for the Republic of Korea and to push the North Koreans out of South Korea, which we did achieve, and we actually gained a little bit of ground for them. Although they did lose a little bit as well, like Kaesong. But outside of that, we kind of won that war because that was our original objective, and then we modified the objective to be way too ambitious, and we said we were going to unite the whole of the Koreas under the Republic of Korea, which then that's why we ended up stalemating the wars, because we changed the war goals to far loftier ones and then didn't achieve it. I would say that we did lose the war in Vietnam in a way. But I could kind of see some people arguing what we didn't because we packed up and left 2 years before South Vietnam collapsed. But generally, if you look at it with how that turned out, it was generally a defeat. The first Gulf War was hands down an unconditional victory for the United States. It was, in every sense of the word, a victory. I would also say that the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a victory, because while it did lead to a lengthy occupation that lasted until 2011, we did see that the Republic of Iraq government that we founded still stands today, and Saddam Hussein never came back into power. We do see that at least a democratic form of a government was built in Iraq, although it's not the most successful one, and it definitely is quite disjointed. It still does exist, and it is operational, so I'd say that that one was a victory in a way. But I would say that Afghanistan was a flat-out defeat, because we spent 20 years there trying to build up a new emirate of Afghanistan, and it collapsed within months of us attempting to leave. So that ended up being all for nothing. But I mean, if anybody had brains, I mean, like, I hate to say this, but if anybody had brains in the whole nation building exercise in Afghanistan, they would have known that Afghanistan is too tribal a nation to be consolidated under a central government like that. And yet they tried to do that for 20 years. And that's why we were there for 20 years, is because they were trying to do something that would fail from the outset. But, you know, that's a whole story for another time. But I'd say that we definitely won a few of them, like more than the Gulf War at least, or at least we've ended up stalemating a lot of them. So a big thanks to your support and help this channel to keep on running. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I just see it a little bit differently. But with that, we're on the next one.
And our next one goes to Game Theory, who puts in a 5. They said, do you expect more wars now that the U.S. has lost the war and nobody's afraid of us?
I would suppose so, yeah. I mean, like, generally most people are going to feel like they're a lot more comfortable confronting the United States, because when they're gaming it out in their head, they're going to say, well, the U.S. might just end up piecing out and giving us everything we want, because they might just get tired of the war and might want to end it for really no other reason than they just got bored. So, you know, I would say yes, I think that it's actually increasing the chance of war, this sort of an action. But a big thanks to you for your support and help this channel to keep running. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on the next one.
And we also have a $20 support from none other than Ross, all the way from Aussie land. And thank you very much, Ross, for that support. He said, they asked me, sir, why are we giving a terrorist nation $300 billion, sir? 300 billions. Would it be? That's billions, you know. But it's really, that's nothing at all compared to what I'm, oh my God, I can't read that part. No. People are such losers with a capital L. That's what they say, sir. That's what they say. Capital L loser. They said the smart people don't like me, sir. They don't like me. I wonder why.
You know, a lot of people talk about me. I'm so high IQ that I only talk like a 5th grader. I only talk like one. It's the biggest and greatest thing. When I walk around and I think in these simple terms. Wow, so big, so beautiful, so golden, so silver, so poor, so poor. They're so poor. Look at them. All these stupid Americans, they voted for me. And I told them I was going to be very transparent. And now I'm the least transparent person that you've ever seen. You could ask me, sir, what did you have for breakfast this morning? I'm going to say, none of your business, you little pleb. Go back to where you came from. You little weak shit. You're so poor. You don't even deserve to know. You voted for me, sure, and it's a democracy, but some people need a dictator. And that's how we act these days. You know, we just do whatever the hell we want, and we don't tell anyone. But a big thing.
They said, sir. They said, sir, we're gonna paint that pine blue. We're gonna call it American flag blue. That's what we're gonna do. The reflecting pool. It reflects. It's something that some people should be doing. They said, reflect on your decisions, sir. Reflect. And I said, I don't do that. I just look forward. No reflect. But the pine will reflect. We'll make the pine reflect, if anything. It's a strange thing. It's greener than an algae farm now. It's crazy, sir. Sir, it turned green quick. What happened is green like money. That's what we're going to call it next. It's green like money. It's American money green for the corporate. You got to love it, sir. Pocketbooks, got to love it. You got to love it when them stocks are climbing. Yes, sir. Stock climb. Sir.
We spent $15 million repainting the bottom of the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, and within days, it turned green again. And so instead of saying that it didn't work out the way we planned on it, I actually blamed it on Obama. No joke, actually did that. The algae just grew because he commanded it to. Apparently he's got a lot of control, like some voodoo shit or something, you know. He could just sit out there, turn green, and it turns green. I don't even know how that happens, but it did. Believe me, it did. And I was shocked as much as all y'all are.
They said, sir, they said, we want Greenland, sir. I said, I'm just going to make Greenland the pine. That's what we're going to do. We're going to turn the pine into Greenland. You look at it now and you say, sir, that looks green, sir. That looks green. Doesn't look blue, sir. I said, you're colorblind, you bastard. Get some good glasses or something. It's not that green. It's not that green. Pour some hydrogen peroxide in it. That'll fix it, sir. Bleach the birds. The birds will be very white, those birds flying out of there. Squaw, look at them, the birds flying out. It's the bleached bird. That's what they call it. Don't touch that water. It might be toxic, but at least the water will be clear, sir. It might be deadly, but it'll be clear.
In the next 2 days, I'm about to change the whole story on this reflecting pool. Some people are going to say, it's a failure, it turned green again. And I'm going to go, no, it's not, because now the green is supposed to symbolize all the money we're making. We're making so much money from all these stupid shenanigans we're doing. You know, we're making more money than everyone ever imagined. It's unbelievable. So many people have been calling me up and going, sir, it's so green. It's green because we're making so much money. People keep calling me up and going, sir, we have to stop making money. The oil companies, they're swimming in money, but all the little people, they're starving for cash. And honestly, we can give a shit about the little people. They don't really matter. It's the big ones that matter.
Hey, listen up, Jack. I got a way to fix it. Forget the hydrogen peroxide, man. Bring corn pop. He'll scare the green out the pond.
That's a great
idea. He'll bring a straight
idea.
razor on it. He'll bring a straight razor. He'll scare the green out of the pond. He'll run off, Jack. He'll run back to Scranton.
I got an idea. How about we fill it? How about we fill it with toxic sludge? I think that's a great idea. It'll kill everything in the pond. Little birds will be coming up to it going,
It turns out what we've done here is we've made America more healthy. And now that we've built an algae farm right in the middle of D.C., you can farm the algae and turn it into a protein, possibly, maybe. It could be a good thing of maybe a little light sprinkling, maybe. Green, that's what they call it. Green is like money too. A little bit of money doesn't hurt anybody.
I went out there to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, and it was growing algae a couple of days after we painted it. So I went out there and I took it. It grows in like these balls, just like these little green balls. I went out and started eating it like a monkey ball. It was so good.
Oh my God. Oh man. I think we might be the most famous at this point for these unhinged impressions, honestly. But it's all off the dome. We didn't write this stuff. And some people are like, well, yeah, I can tell you didn't write it. It sucks. Thank you. But I'll be here all night. We are here every night, by the way. It's not a joke. That's serious.
The people who say that about our jokes, they say, sir, your jokes are so terrible. They have the opinions of equine creatures, horses even. They come from the U.S. Park Police horse stables down here on the south end. This is where they keep them. They sit there and say, go back to eating on your salt block. That's also where we put Sergei Lavrov when he came to Washington. He went right here. He hung out here with his fellow brethren. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on into the next one.
And our next one here is going to go to none other than Zyper Sniper, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Zyper, for that $10 support. And Zyper said, have you heard of an upcoming game called Chronicles Medieval? It looks pretty good.
I did. It actually does look pretty cool, and I'm actually seeing about getting it, but it kind of depends on the price. If it's too expensive, I might avoid it. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on the next one.
Also, moving on here to our next one. This one goes to Elfhednar, who puts in a 5. And Elfhednar said, I think an Islamic Confederacy would have worked better for Afghanistan. Make the tribal areas more autonomous and more or less and self-govern themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly what they should have done. That's what they should have done. Like, they should have done something that would have fit the region. But instead, because it was, you know, like literally right after 9/11 when they invaded, they said, oh, we have to make it a republic. It's like, that's not going to work. It's like every time we go somewhere, we can't turn it into a republic, you know? Like, it's like, it might not support it. And Afghanistan certainly didn't. There's absolutely no building blocks for a republic in Afghanistan, or really any kind of a democracy, honestly. You would have to create something that has some sort of totalitarian control to it, but then also decentralize it as well to an extent. Basically, you have to make a kingdom. Like, you could have a king, but then you would have to let all of the little fiefdoms and their lords have a great deal of autonomy like they had in the Middle Ages. That would have worked well for Afghanistan, but that wouldn't have been supported politically, because then people would have gone, the U.S. is building a kingdom. And it's like, well, that's all that's going to work there. But a big thanks to you for support. And with that, we're on the next one.
Also, a big shout out to Plazoth and Plutonium Fever for each putting in a $3 and $2 support, and they said LSA.
Hey, and a big thanks to you for support, and long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And we're on to the next one.
We also have a 2 from Miller, who said first time giver and keep it 100 facts LSA.
Hey, and we will. Thanks to your support, too. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And this one goes to Foster, who puts in a 2, who said thoughts on the Union Pac and Norfolk Southern merger.
Union Pacific. Like in Norfolk's a bad idea. It is going to force CSX and BNSF to merge. The railways are going to become a duopoly for the larger part in this country. It's a very bad idea economically. It's going to be deleting a lot of jobs, removing a lot of jobs because of the streamlining of their services. It's also going to create it's just going to be bad for the transportation infrastructure in general, not to go into like the essay length like thoughts I have on it. It's going to be bad for the infrastructure system for trucking and railroading, and that's why I'm generally not a big fan of the Norfolk Southern Union Pacific merger. I like both of the companies, and I like all the railroad companies. They do pretty decent. It's just that merging like that, like BNSF and CSX have both said from their railway presidents, it's going to be a very bad idea for the longevity of the industry and what that's going to end up creating or producing. So I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. Not that I have any ill will towards Union Pacific or Norfolk Southern. But with that, we are on to the Morse code decoders and the live chat. Sadly, due to time constraints, we're only going to be able to get 3, and I say 3 live chats for the night. So Matthew, what do we got?
In the meantime, we have a $2 super chat from Game Theory, who said, how do I harass Nightbot?
You can't. It's a machine. Like it's unharassable. It just does its job, and very impersonally. It like mutes people all over, sometimes for no reason, sadly. But it does its job at least, and we're happy for that. It takes the workload off of both of us a little bit, moderating the chat. So with that, we are on to the Morse code decoder. So what do we got?
And I did not, I don't know if I missed it or not, but I didn't see the Morse code decoders send it in tonight. I don't think so. I don't know if they were, maybe I might have missed it because the odds are one of them probably sent it in, but for some reason I didn't see it. So do you remember what the Morse code is?
No. Like, I
Did
don't.
you make it?
I made it. I don't hardly remember what's in it most of the time. Like they have, like you read it back to me, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it was, and then that's like correct, but I don't usually remember. I mean, man, I have to cover so much stuff during the show on the news side of things. I completely forget what happens like before the show most of the time.
Damn.
I gotta say, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry. I don't know what it is. Also, North Star said, you know, when you're walking alongside a Union Pacific track, you actually are on Warren Buffett's personal property. He could have you arrested for trespassing. That's actually a BNSF. BNSF is Warren Buffett's little deal. That's what he runs. Union Pacific, I actually don't know. Well, Union Pacific isn't owned like BNSF. BNSF is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, which is run by Warren Buffett. But Union Pacific is run by its own board of directors with its own shareholders and everything. It runs on a very corporate structure. Berkshire Hathaway, though, and BNSF runs on a totally different structure, which is actually kind of unique. So you're right about that. It's just that it's BNSF, not UP. But anyways, with that, we actually have one more super chat here.
We also have a 5 from Kyle Padell. He said, Ghost of Kiev.
The Ghost of Kiev? I remember, man, you remember that back in the day when everyone was like, oh my God, the Ghost of Kiev. And it wasn't even real.
No, it was real, remember?
No, the Ghost of Kiev was never real. Like, the Ukrainian Air Force came out with a publicized statement in the first week and was like, we don't know where that came from, but that's just not even real. And then everyone was like,
man.
Propaganda! Like, man, like, it's like, oh my God. I remember that, man. It was a War Thunder thing that blew up into a real thing. And it was never real. It was a War Thunder thing that someone came up with on a War Thunder forum.
Damn, I hate that.
Yeah, but then that spurned so many memes. Like they'd be like, it's like the Ghost of Meal or something like that. Like there was a million of them. I wish let me go pull them up. The Ghost of Kiev memes. The Ghost of Kiev memes. I would get such a laugh out of these back in the day. Where in the world are they? Damn. tell y'all, folks, sadly, I cannot find the memes I used to see back in the day. But it was like plays on the Ghost of Kiev or like who he was and everything else. It was hilarious. Sadly, the Ghost of Kiev was not real though. The Ukrainian Air Force stated that, but then they said that later on they then kind of reinterpreted it in the canon. They were like, well, the Ghost of Kiev is real, but it's not just one person. It's all of the amazing Ukrainian pilots and aviators that keep the skies of Ukraine safe. And so then they made the Ghost of Kiev kind of like a symbolic thing, but the Ghost of Kiev as a person was sadly never real. But with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have two from Game Theory. He said big booty worm.
Big booty worm. Man, look at that thing throwing it back. Yeah. I gotta say, that big booty worm is gonna haunt us for the rest of the channel's history. But it was hilarious, though. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. That was, like, insane. But a big thanks to your support. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And that viewer is going to be, we'll see here, Frozen Fire, who said 40% of oil got hit near Moscow. Any idea where the other 60% is for Moscow?
Sadly, no. I think it's
Getting
shipped
pumped
in.
in.
I think it's trucked in. Yeah, I think it's literally like trucked in or railroaded in. But the refinery, I believe, is the one that provided the base of the fuel supplies for Moscow. But the other 60% was trucked and railroaded in. So I hope that has addressed that well. And we're on to the second to last question of the night.
Also, by the way, apparently, I'm seeing here that Paul Schultz, if you try to put in the Morse a second ago, I did not see it in the chat. It didn't pop up in the chat. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. I've realized that sometimes if you put certain phrases in the chat, for whatever reason, it doesn't actually pop up in the chat. I've done that a couple of times, and Andrew won't even see what I put in the chat for whatever reason. So it could be one of those weird phrases that YouTube just censors out or something like that. I'm not sure. But try it maybe one more time and see if I can see it. But I think it might be censoring it out possibly. But moving into our next one here in the meantime, this one's going to go to Shadow Knight, who said, why don't they go to the areas without restrictions and transfer the fuel to areas that do?
I don't know what it's actually asking. I don't know what that's asking. What do you think it's asking?
Let's see here. Honestly, Shadow Knight, I think sadly, I did the same thing. I think sadly, I think the subject might have gotten lost there at the beginning. I'm not sure what that refers to.
Oh, man, I don't know. But anyways, we're on to the second to last question of the night again.
And this one goes to Snow Angel. He said, do you believe this is the time for Ukraine and Europe to make a final big push while Russia is at its lowest, or just give up? And Russia is its absolute lowest right now. The time is now.
I would say that the Ukrainians are probably going to make a larger push in the southern front now that the supply lines are largely completely collapsing. So I would say yes, now is probably a good time, but it won't be immediately. It'll probably be closer to the autumn months. And so with that, I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person who put in the lucky last question of the night?
And we also have a $2 super chat from DWRB before we get to that. He said, maybe the next LSA patch should have the worm.
No. The worm is funny, but the worm is not becoming like a canon LSA thing. It's a little too out there, you know? Like, the marmot and the honey badger, certainly. But the big booty worm, it's a little too sexual. But anyways,
man, overly sexual worm. I'm gonna tell you what.
Man, overtly sexual worm. No, we could not do anything with merch with the big booty worm. And also, we would have to get the rights for that thing. And I do not want to pay someone for the rights for the big booty worm. Like, I could never imagine shelling out cash to just get the contractual copyrights to that thing. But anyways, with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night, I believe.
This one goes to Dan Brooks, who said, doesn't radar systems run on diesel generators, and is it possible they don't have the fuel to run them?
Yes, some of them actually do. You're actually dead on with that. And so they might be running out of fuel to even run the radar systems. So I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And heavier is Loopy Linda, who said even with sanctions on Russia, they were still selling oil to other countries, right? And what overall effect will that have on global supply? And those other spots will need it from somewhere.
Well, it won't really have that much of an overall effect because the sanctions have been in effect for years and most of the global supply routes had already shifted elsewhere, like the Middle East. So what it'll do is we'll just cut them back out and it'll lead to the supply routes returning back to how they were if the Strait of Hormuz and its transits are unfettered. So I hope that does address it the best I can, and we've reached the end of tonight's stream. I'm going to thank you all greatly for having been here tonight. We're always honored and greatly appreciative of so many of you all being here over the course of the stream. We have 14.3 thousand people here at the peak, and almost 90,000 people have watched this show before it ended. Yeah, that's actually not that bad. And I got to say, a huge thanks to all of y'all so much once again for watching, and we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news from around the world. And if there is a short war video to be made, Enforcer Matt will be the one making that short war video. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe. Slava Ukraini, Ram Slava. Long live the Lee Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, we will see you all tomorrow on Wednesday night for the 10 p.m. War News stream, of course, at our usual, and also maybe midday for a video if there is enough news to cover. But in the meantime, though, thank you all for joining us once again tonight. We're appreciative that all of you showed up tonight to see the news yet again, and we hope to see you all tomorrow as well. And with that, Slava Ukraine, Hiram Slava, get some rest, and good night.